This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Bryan, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey. It's Twilight, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to the first episode in our summer series for 2020. You've seen the previews. You've seen the memes. It's finally time we're talking about Twilight, Katie. Are you excited?
I'm so excited.
Me too. This is going to be fun. We're going to mention here ahead of time, as we've done with our previous summer series, there will be some space in between the episodes. So if you're really excited and tuning in for the Twilight episode, stick around for the other ones, but there will be some episodes in between the Twilight episodes to give us time to read them. So this first episode will just be the first movie and the first book. Also, we'll caveat this one, which is true for all of our summer series. We're going to do slightly deep dives. This is a slightly different format than normal. We both read and watched. Mm-hmm. For this first episode, we don't have any sort of other outside perspective. That may change in the future. We'll see. But for now, our plan is to just have us two discuss this series without any sort of outside interference, shall we say. We're not, neither of us. This is my first time reading the series.
Yeah.
And the first time watching these movies, other than this first one, which I've seen before once. You've read these books quite a few times, as you discussed in the prequel series, in the prequel episode. This is probably the series that, of the three summer series we've done so far, that we're the least knowledgeable on, maybe fans of. I don't want to speak for you in terms of how big of a fan you are, or were at the time.
I think is more of the key. Like this is a thing that not a lot of people know, because I did the thing where I pretended I never liked Twilight. Right. But I used to really like Twilight. Yeah. I wrote fan fiction of Twilight. We'll just put that out there.
So you're
out in the open.
In a very large company of people who wrote Twilight fan fiction. But including E.L. James, right?
But that was a long time ago.
Right. And this isn't a series you've reread a ton of times, I would assume.
No.
In the same way of like Harry Potter.
Yeah, definitely not something that I've been invested in since it initially had its like boom of popularity, like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings we hadn't read as much, and we weren't like as big like lore heads as some people are. But I had seen the movies dozens of times. I'd read all the books except for the last one, I think, at least once or twice. And so I like the video games. I was like steeped in Lord of the Rings kind of knowledge a lot more. So my point is that going into this, if you're a huge Twilight head, first, you be excited. We're not just going to come in here and dunk on it, as we mentioned in the prequel, if you are a fan of this series. If you're not a fan of this series, there will be things we're going to talk about that we did not like. I mean, as you could tell from the intro quote for this episode, there are some silly things in this series that are worth talking about, and some critical things that are worth talking about. So it'll be a measured response. But we're not super mega know everything about this series, so there may be things that we misinterpret or don't know or that sort of thing. Hello, Siri, I wasn't talking to you. Anyways. So if you have, we would love to get your feedback. If you are a mega fan and you know everything and there's some little detail that we don't quite understand, let us know. We would love to hear from you. But all that being said, we do not have Guess Who, because we both read the books, obviously. But we do have Let Me Sum Up. If you haven't read the movie or seen the book, scratch that, reverse it, then you'll get a little taste of what this story is about. So Katie, I'm going to let you take Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
17-year-old Bella Swan moves to Forks, Washington, to live with her dad and attend high school. At school, she meets the Cullens, a family of mysterious misfits, and Bella is immediately drawn to Edward, the youngest of the family. As their relationship develops, Bella quickly realizes that Edward is not a human, and in fact, he and his entire family are vampires. This complicates their relationship, but ultimately they decide to be together. This is 80% of the book.
Sorry, I wrote this.
One evening, a new coven of vampires shows up, and one of them becomes obsessed with hunting and eating Bella. The Cullens and Bella deploy a plan to keep her safe, but when she thinks her mother is in danger, Bella decides to sacrifice herself to save her. Edward and the Cullens show up just in time to save Bella, kill the evil vampire James, and the story ends with Bella and Edward attending prom together, cementing their relationship.
There you go.
I almost started laughing because Edward and the Cullens sounds like a band.
A sweet band?
It sounds like a folk band.
They would have a folk band. That's one of... we'll talk about it. But there is going to be a new segment later in this episode to kind of replace some of the ones we're missing by not having somebody who didn't read the book. And basically, I'll tease it now. I'm going to predict what I think happens throughout this series before we get to them, because the only thing I know is anything about the first one. It's the only movie I had seen, and it's the only book I have now read. So I know nothing, literally, except for like two small things about what happens in later stories. So we're going to have a segment where I get to predict what I think is going to happen and see how correct I am, which I think should be fun. So stick around for that later. But I may have to predict Edward and the Cullens. That opening act for Mumford and Sons. So, as we mentioned, we don't have a guest, and we don't have a non-book reader, so we're going to not do Was That in the Book? Or Lost in Adaptation. That being said, you'll obviously get a lot of answers if you had questions about what was in the book and what wasn't during our main segments, which is what we're going to get to now, where we discuss what was better in the book, what was better in the movie, and what the movie nailed. Those are our three main big segments if you're new here. Where we compare and contrast and decide which was better in which different ways. And then, so obviously some of that stuff will kind of explore what was and wasn't in the book to begin with. So let's get to our first segment, Better in the Book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So right off the bat, the movie added a voiceover for Bella, which we mentioned in the prequel.
We did mention that in the prequel. I mentioned that was the director's idea, which is a very obvious idea when you read the book.
Yeah. And the movie added this voiceover and somehow managed to make Bella's inner monologue even less interesting than it is in the book.
It really does. It's one of the weak points of the film that we'll get into eventually and kind of discuss more in depth, especially in our final verdict. But it definitely, the inner monologue, while necessary, which is often, we've talked about this before, a sign of a weakness in a film. I don't know if it necessarily is in this instance. I think you kind of need to have it. But they didn't do a very good job of it. Yeah. Because Bella is particularly uninteresting in this film. And her inner monologue, it doesn't give us much insight into why we should care or find her interesting. At least that was my experience.
No, I did not feel like we should find her interesting at all in the movie.
No, and you do have some things that we'll get to in the book that are interesting about Bella that we'll discuss here very shortly. So I would definitely agree with that. So the first time Bella and Edward meet in the film, this is better in the book because I didn't have to see it as I did in the movie. The first time they meet is, apart from seeing each other across the cafeteria, but the first time they're near each other is when they're in biology class or science class or whatever together, and they have to share a desk. And Bella walks into the room, and in the movie they make the choice of there being a fan on behind her that wafts her stank right over to Edward. And the face that Robert Pattinson makes in reaction to smelling Bella that first time is so hilarious and silly that scene is almost exactly what happens in the book. And his reaction is probably written in a similar way, but you're imagining it and you're not seeing it. So which happens a lot in this. It was a lot of my issues. And most of my better in the books, a lot of them were things that just I felt didn't translate well from page to book because of how ridiculous they are to look at. and this is the first one that really stuck out to me, because he reacts so violently and cartoonishly to her scent, and like, yeah.
I was almost tempted to put this under better in the movie just because it's so dumb and so hilarious that it's funny.
It is funny,
but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So no, I couldn't put it in better in the movie. I was just tempted to shitpost.
It doesn't make sense, and it's not. There's no nuance to it. I have a note later about Kristen Stewart in this film, and about how I think she actually does a pretty good job. Robert Pattinson is a good actor. In this particular scene, I don't know if it's the direction, I don't know if it's what it is, but his reaction does not sell any layers to it. It just looks like a cartoony, like, it looked like you smelled the world's worst fart.
Yeah.
Like how a little kid would act that.
In the book, it's described that he looks like really angry and disgusted at the same time.
Yeah.
Which, sure.
Sure, yeah.
And you can imagine that, like, a lot of different ways.
And, like, on edge and, like, yeah.
And then in the movie, that translates to him, like, putting his hand over his
He, like, dry
mouth.
heaves. He goes, like, ugh. Like, he does, like, like a gag. And it's like, oh, okay. Because that doesn't really make sense. It's not that he's disgusted.
Not. Yeah,
it's that
he thinks so she's delicious.
He's so entranced that he, like, he's trying to, like, fight every fiber of his being to not just immediately eat her. It's, like, the point. But his reaction in the movie is, like, literally like somebody let off a stink bomb or something. It's silly. It's dumb. It's bad.
We get past that then, and when he finally does talk to her, because he doesn't talk to her that first time at all.
No, because he's just concentrating on not eating her.
But then the next time she sees him, he does talk to her. And the way he delivers his lines in that, and I don't know if it got a little bit better or maybe I just got used to it, but that initial line was, like, so oddly delivered.
Oh, is that what does he say? He says,
I don't even remember. He just says hello to her.
Yeah,
and,
he
like,
says, like, I'm Edward.
Yeah, he says, like, I'm Edward and you must be Bella or something like that.
Sorry I didn't say, or sorry about the other day or something like that, yeah.
But it's delivered, like, he, like, half whispers and it's, like, kind of mush-mouthed.
I really like Kristen Stewart's performance watching this time, especially after reading the book. I think she does a really good job channeling the kind of emotional, like, angst of her character and what she's going through, at least to me, and some of the subtleties of her performances. But so it didn't bother me too much overall. But they don't have particularly good chemistry together, I didn't think. At least not early on in the movie, which maybe that's intentional. I don't know. That could be intentional, I guess, arguably. One of the things we mentioned that about Bella's character in the movie, about how the movie decides to use the voiceover, but it's not particularly interesting. We don't find out many interesting things about Bella. One of the things they don't mention, which is a little line in the book that I thought was interesting, is we learn a lot about, like, what she likes to read and, like, the kind of thing that she's really into reading and that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And she's a very smart person, which we get a little bit of in the movie, but she's very intelligent. And one of the things she mentions in the book that is not in the movie is that she's writing a paper about whether or not Shakespeare's female characters in, I think specifically Hamlet, maybe, are misogynistic.
Yeah.
Which is she's doing critical theory in junior year in high school, which I thought was an interesting... Yeah, it gives us an insight to the kind of person she is. Mm-hmm. And the movie doesn't give anything like that.
Yeah, I think that is a good example of the kind of thing that we lose with Bella's character from book to movie. Like, she's smart.
Yeah.
We know, like, she likes to read. She assigns herself challenging essay topics. Yeah. She's good at school.
The biology class where they're doing the onion thing, that's also in the book. And she knows it all because she did it at her old school before she transferred. So, like, she did a similar project or whatever. But she remembers it all and is still good at, like, so she clearly, like, was able to, like, retain all that information. So she's clearly, intelligent and kind of gets and likes science and stuff like that. So yeah, though that side of her character is completely devoid completely missing from the film, which is, disappointing. And we'll talk more about.
While we're still on the subject of Bella, look, like, the book is long. It's not always the most fun to be in her point of view. But I think one of my bigger complaints about the first part of the movie, where we're kind of jumping from, like, interaction with Edward to interaction with Edward.
Yeah.
Without her inner monologue, it felt so disjointed to me.
Yeah.
Like, we were just kind of bouncing from incident to incident without really getting her thoughts on the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the thread that connects all that stuff in the book.
And it is interesting that they would decide to do a voiceover and then use it so sparingly, because there's not a ton of it in the movie. Like, it's not as prevalent as I would have thought going into it, especially considering how much time we spend in Bella's head in the book. It seems like it would be very important, and I think it is one of the failings of the film, is that they didn't use the voiceover more, which is rare for a film that's like a bad thing, that they didn't use the voiceover more. But I think in this instance, it would have helped.
Well, I mean, there's poor use of voiceover, but I think we really needed that here.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think they could have done something like, not that I think it would have been a good idea to do it like diary style, but we watched My Mad Fat Diary not too long ago, which I think was a good example of how to use voiceover.
There's quite a bit of voiceover. Yeah.
And we got a lot of like the main characters' like inner thoughts and her anxieties, and what she imagined people were thinking about her. And I think that this movie could have really benefited from something like that.
For sure.
Like from that kind of treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good example of a way that that this film could have used a voiceover that would have made it way more effective, especially for what you think the target audience and goals of the movie are. Yeah. Based on what the book is. And we're both going to talk about this in our final verdict, so we don't want to spoil it too much. But, the target audience, obviously, in general, is, and when you mentioned it in the prequel, younger girls from, preteen to young adult, whatever.
When Twilight came out, I was 15.
Yeah, you were right in the middle.
right in the hot zone.
Yeah, but anywhere probably from 11 or 12 in that range. Yeah, up to 20, like 20, 25, even and beyond. Obviously, anybody could read it, but that was like the primary target audience. And that was probably, I would imagine, who it was most successful with and most popular with, obviously. So it is strange that they wouldn't lean more into their protagonist, who is a 17-year-old girl's perspective in the movie. It's a weird choice.
Yeah, it's a super weird choice. So we move on a little bit from that first and second interaction with Edward, and she's starting to suspect that something is up with him. Yeah. She's trying to figure out what. And at one point, she meets up with another character, Jacob.
Yeah, this is when they're at the beach.
And he tells her a spooky story.
Yeah. About his tribe, the Quiyoyet. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Quileat. Is how it sounded.
Okay,
in the video that I watched,
he tells a story from his tribe, the Quileat tribe. And about his ancestors have this tale about that his ancestors were like wolf people.
They're like descended from wolves, and there's this story that a long time ago they made a bargain with this group of the Cold Ones. Yeah, that they wouldn't kill each other. They wouldn't kill each other if they stayed off their land. If they stayed off of their tribal land, and supposedly these particular Cold Ones were different, and they didn't harm humans. Yeah.
And he references that his grandfather thinks that group was the Cullens. Like that's like a thing.
That's kind of like the punchline to the story. Is like, ooh, but the thing is, they're the same ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are the Cullens, and so she's like, "Oh, okay." But he's like, it's just a silly story." Like,
whatever. He just thinks it's a story, but there are some older members, including his father, who buy into it. Is it his
grandfather, or is it his father?
No, it's his father.
Okay.
I was disappointed in the movie's rendering of that story. Like,
I agree.
I thought they could have done more with it.
I originally had this in the movie, nailed it, and I thinking back on it after I saw you had it better in the book, I think you're right. I do think it's more mysterious and intriguing in...
Yeah, like the way the movie tells it, I thought was, like you said, more mysterious.
No, the way the book tells it.
Yeah, the way the book tells it, sorry. It was more mysterious, more intriguing. The book, or the movie, gosh dang.
It's so hard.
The movie cuts out some detail. And they do like a kind of brief like flashback type scene, but it's not very interesting.
No, they really could have done something really cool with it. And now this is other thing to mention that we realized as we were watching this. And I think one of the reasons this movie kind of falls short in a lot of ways is the budget was relatively small.
Yeah.
The budget for this film was $36 million, which is in 2007 when they filmed this is almost nothing. Like, that's not nothing, obviously, but by comparison, in 2001, the first Harry Potter movie, the budget was $125 million.
Yeah.
And that's 8 years before that they filmed it. So, like, clearly, there's a disparity in what they're able to accomplish. And I think that's maybe something where they would... Because what I'm imagining is something that would be really cool, is like take something similar to the Elder Wand story in... the seventh, what is it? Deathly Hallows, about the three brothers story from Harry Potter, and animated, but don't do it similar. Do a Native American tribal art. Do some research, find some cool art representative
hire some Native artists.
Yeah, from specifically from the Quileute tribe that would be, and have them come up with some cool ideas to portray this story in a way that feels both like respectful and interesting to the native people in the region, but also is visually really interesting. I think that could have been a really cool way to do it. And again, I think maybe that's a great idea they had, but when your budget is 30 is
I think that would have been dope. And I understand too, one of the challenges that the movie faced here was not actually wanting to like show them and reveal that like it is actually the Cullens.
You do see them though, and it's very clearly you see Robert Pattinson.
I mean, yeah, but also
like from far away and like kind
I got
of in
what
shadow.
They were trying to do.
Right. Yeah, I guess. But see, if you do the animation, you don't have to show them at all. Like it's just like
problem solved.
You can just have like vague allusions to that being them, that it becomes, because you could even be more subtle. Like in an animation, you could be way more subtle and have little cues, little hints with certain hair and styles and stuff.
Ooh, and you could do it like super creepy.
Yeah.
And really like send some shivers up the audience's spine.
It would be so cool.
Would have been really cool.
And again, there's no way that I mean, maybe they didn't have that idea, but I would be more inclined to think that it's something like we didn't have the budget to do as much as we wanted with a scene like that, so we just have to have him tell a story and shoot 3 flashback shots of them standing mysteriously in foggy woods. Like, that's real easy to do. Hiring a bunch of people to animate this really cool, in-depth flashback story is not nearly as affordable. So,
rip.
Yeah. So one of the things that's in the movie a lot, and it has been memed on a lot, and I don't want to say rightfully so, but to some extent rightfully so, is the depiction of vampires running around quickly, speedily. So that's an element from the book. They do move very quickly. They are very strong. They have superhuman attributes. You know, they can run really fast. They can jump really high. They can.
Yeah, they basically have superpowers.
They're superpowers. Yeah, they have like Superman superpowers, except they can't fly.
Yeah.
At least as far as I know.
They have early Superman superpowers.
Yeah, they have the original Superman.
He can only leap tall buildings.
And break stuff and run real fast. So they had to depict that in some way in the film because it's a pivot. It's like a huge part of what they are, obviously. And again, I think they're limited to some extent by budget here. They did a lot of stuff practically. It's a lot of wire work and interesting ways to like depict them running around quickly. Sometimes they speed up the shot so that they move real fast. Sometimes they're on wires running while they're running through the woods. And that's the one I'm speaking of, is the first time we see it happen is, I think it's Edward or somebody is running through the woods, and it's a wide shot. And they're so clearly on wires.
Yeah,
being pulled through the woods, running, and they're not touching the ground in a way that looks, because the way it's depicted the way it's explained in the book, what I envisioned was less like running real fast and more like leaping, like from tree to tree, and like like just like almost like hyper Tarzan, almost like where they're like leaping through trees and then like they like land up like kind of like Spider-Man without like the ropes.
Yeah.
Is like how I imagine them moving slightly. And so they're really quick, but it's more of like, yeah, like a leaping thing versus like a I'm the Flash, which is kind of what they go with in the movie. And it just looks bad.
It looks really bad.
It hasn't aged well, but it also didn't look... I mean, people were making fun of it immediately anyways. I don't think it looked particularly great at the time. But they didn't have the budget to fully CG this stuff. Not even close. Again, $37 million. The budget for, like, to fully CG that much of, like, the action scenes had to have been well over $100 million to make it look not terrible. Which we'll see. I know in later movies they got bigger budgets and maybe things change. But... I applaud them going for practical effects. It just looks silly, though, is my point. It was my long way of getting to a simple point, is that it just looks cheesy and not particularly good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it looks okay. Other times it looks really bad. This was a scene that was missing from the movie that I thought was really compelling and it was really good in the book. And one of the only times we get like a real concrete, okay, I can see why Bella likes Edward moment, other than like he's mysterious and handsome and like a jerk, because that's 90% of, and that's what we get in the movie primarily, is the reason she's attracted to him is he's like a handsome jerk who's mysterious. It's like every bad trope of like the kind of guy that gets the girl is like, oh, he's so brooding.
He's the mysterious brooding bad boy.
But in the book there's this really sweet thing, which is when after they finally start talking, he spends, like, she wants to know about him because she's like, something's off about you. This is after he saves her, I think. I'm pretty sure this is after he saves her, and she, like, realizes there's something weird about him. He spends, like, 2 whole days just asking her everything about herself.
Yeah, he wants to know everything about her.
Yeah, like, what's your favorite books, your favorite, like, and like, at least that's what it's portrayed in the book, is that, like, every thing she likes, he asks about all of her family, about all of her friends, her relationships. He wants to know everything about her, and it's a little potentially overbearing and weird, but it's at least something that's a reasonable grounds for a relationship, is knowing things about each other and liking those things about each other,
and feeling like the other person genuinely wants to know those things about you.
And values you.
Like from that perspective, you can understand like why she starts to fall for him, like beyond that just initial attraction and intrigue, because he's very clearly invested in knowing her.
And that idea that he sits and listens to her every word, and she can tell that he's really like listening and isn't just like humoring her, and it's something concrete for their relationship to kind of be based on that, so that moving forward it feels a little less like magic fairy tale love at first sight, and a little more like an actual relationship. And the movie doesn't really have that. We get a slight allusion to it in the movie. There's a montage of it's after they don't have sex in the movie. And then he stays the night, and there's like a quick montage of them like staying up all night talking. And so you can kind of get a little bit maybe implied that you know, like that's a similar idea. Like, oh, it's not just physical. Look, oh, they're sitting and talking all night. How cute. Like, I get it, but it doesn't feel quite the same as it does in the book, because again, we don't get to see like what they're talking about, and we have no idea. And we also, it doesn't feel as deliberate on Edward's part. It's just not quite as well accomplished as well.
I mean, montages are good, I think, for showing us a lot of action that we already understand. But I think with that type of conversation, you need to see/hear at least a little bit of it to get sent in the right direction.
You could do it in montage style, but we need interspersed sound bites of him asking something and her saying something. And you could even do it in cute ways. It could be a very quick moment, a very quick scene, where it could be, and you know, she asks him a question, and then he goes, okay, now it's my turn to ask you a question. He asks her a question, and she answers it, and then we cut to a montage, and it's them talking, so we know that this is what the same, that we've established he's asking her questions. And then, you know, 30 seconds later, like, she's getting a drink at the drinking fountain, and he pops up from around the corner and is like, what's your favorite drink? Or, you know what I mean? Not that silly, but like, and then we keep going, and then and it could be a little more playful and fun to give this lighthearted aspect and dynamic to the relationship that is, again, more compelling and more grounded in a thing that's real other than handsome bad boy. Touch me nice. I don't like... it's just... That's all we get in the movie. And it's... Yeah. And it's... I will say, the book does get tedious with it.
Oh, definitely.
Like, I made the joke in the Let Me Sum Up that the first 80% of the book is just the two of them hanging out.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's primarily a story about how their relationship develops. I mean, that's the thing.
Which makes sense, because you're setting up later books, and it's about their relationship, and that's the point, and I get it, and you need that. I think there was a happy medium to be found between what the book does and what the movie does. The movie doesn't have enough. The book has a little too much.
We never found the we did not find
the happy medium. So after she finally figures out he's a vampire, the scene in the movie is interesting. They changed the delivery that I kind of like. But his reveal of him being sparkly, it's obviously in the movie and in the book. In the movie, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. It felt like it didn't have the impact they were going for. So in the book, what happens is after he reveals that he's a vampire, she's like, "You're a vampire," and he's like, "Yeah." I don't know if she actually ever says the word vampire. They changed that in the movie.
They dance around it for a while.
They dance around it. In the movie, I did like the change where he's like, "Say it," and she's like, "Vampire." I felt like that was almost like an interesting, weird consent moment, almost. Like having her say... Like, acknowledge it openly.
Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
You know what I mean? It's like, because if they leave it unsaid and dance around it, like, it feels weird and like she's not maybe acknowledging it to herself. Whereas if he's like, say what I am. Yeah. Which is like a vampire. That felt, I liked that dynamic of the movie scene, and it doesn't play out quite the same in the book. But then he reveals like what happens in the light, which is the thing they've been talking about. She's like, "Do you burst into flames if you go into sunlight?" And he's like, "No, I'll show you." And in the book, they just go into a meadow, and he gets all sparkly, and she's like reveres it, as she describes it in the book as like the most magical, like beautiful person she's ever seen. And he's gorgeous and sparkling, and he's like radiant, and he's in like a great mood. And they're like, they share this beautiful, like endless, timeless, nebulous experience in this meadow together for hours. In the movie, he reveals that he's a vampire, and then he's like, this is during his like angsty, like, "I'm a vampire. We can't be together.
I'm a monster.
I'm a monster." And he goes, "Look at me." And he like walks. He doesn't say "look at me," but basically he might as well. And then he walks into the sunlight, and he's like all sparkly, and he's like, "Look at the monster I am." And there's this weird dissonance.
He's just sparkling
between what we're seeing and like what he's saying and portraying.
It's almost like, because I had notes about this too. Because to me, it was like the movie's idea is that he wants to show her what he looks like in the sunlight to scare her, except it's not scary.
No, it's not scary.
Because he's just sparkling.
He's sparkly.
Like, the way that the movie handled that was weird, and I feel like they did not at all understand what was happening during that scene in the book.
No, I agree.
And I was like, maybe it's weird because the movie kind of shuffled it around.
It kind of slams all those scenes together, like her realizing he's a vampire and saying it out loud, the sunlight reveal, and him like talking about how he's a monster. That all kind of gets crammed into one scene, whereas in the book it's kind of spread out.
But in the book, like after she reveals that, I mean, they do kind of dance around it. Yeah. But like she knows what he is. Clear that... And then this trip to the meadow where he reveals his sparkliness
is like a date.
Yeah, it's a planned date that's like several days removed from her figuring it out. Yeah. And it just plays like really weird in the movie. I'm like, I don't know what you expect me to get out of this movie.
I think the thing they thought was that this moment they felt like this is a big like visual reveal. It needs to be tied to the big reveal of him being a vampire. Like that, I think that's what they thought in the script. Like, is like, it doesn't make sense to them to have this, especially when you're truncating. It makes sense to put this at the same time where everything's revealed. This is the scene where we reveal things. Mm-hmm. And so this is where we find out he's a vampire specifically, and where we find out he's sparkly, and it's this big thing, dramatic moment. But again, the dissonance of how he looks and what it is doesn't make any sense with the emotions that they're portraying in that scene.
Like, like in that moment in the movie, like, I wanted her to be like, okay.
Yeah. I'm a monster. You mean...
What?
You're just, like, really glittery. You're just kind of shiny.
You just kind of look like you rolled around in some glitter.
Yeah. It's a weird... That scene does not work. That particular moment. I think some of the other parts of that, like I said, the part before that I thought works pretty well. And some of the parts after that, they're a little angsty and like music video-y where he's just running around in the woods like, and she's like following him around and he's just like venting his angst about being a vampire. There's like most of those lines are all from the book and they're similar, but it all being slammed together, it's like a roller coaster of like what I'm supposed to be feeling, and it doesn't quite work in the same way that the book does.
And I know we've already talked about the special effects, so I'm not going to, like, really harp on it.
Yes.
But, again, pretty rough.
Yeah.
Like, the sparkling was pretty rough looking.
It
wasn't
okay,
as bad as the other stuff, but also, like, why was there a sound effect for it?
That was dumb.
Like, what?
That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, what's that sound effect? Why is there a sound effect? Because it literally doesn't make any sense.
But that offers maybe more of a reason for why they can't go out in the sun, because theoretically you could maybe cover up, you could put on a heavy layer of foundation, but if there's also a sound following you around,
it's true.
I mean, how do you hide that?
You don't.
You can't.
It's just a rough.
It's a weird choice.
It's a rough scene. I want to talk more about sparkling in our odds and ends because I have a specific thing that I thought would have been interesting about it, and they didn't do it. At least I couldn't. I thought that's where she was going at first in the book, but then I don't think she went there. But we're going to put a pin in that. We're going to discuss it more in our odds and ends. So the book doesn't have the line, "You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey," so that's a plus for the book.
Yeah.
Big old...
We can chalk up some points for the book there. Whose idea was that?
Maybe Robert Pattinson?
Somehow I doubt it. Although maybe he was just trying to tank the whole thing.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe he knew what he was doing. He was like, woof. All right. I mean, I'm flying around on trees. This is silly. I don't know, but it's not a good line. It's a real silly line.
Really bad line.
I don't know if this is better in the book, but it's something I wanted to talk about because it's not in the movie, and it was a scene that made me laugh in the book. It's in the bedroom scene. I'm fairly certain. Edward explains to Bella that he could literally... Have we cursed you in this?
Yeah, we have.
He explains that he could literally fuck her to death, a la like Spider-Man and Lois Lane, or Superman and Lois Lane. It's interesting, their conversation. Basically, Bella asks him, kind of in a roundabout way, about marriage and if it's the same for vampires and humans. And he says... most of the human desires are there, just hidden behind more powerful desires. Oh, was all I could say. That was Bella. Was there a purpose behind your curiosity? Well, I did wonder about you and me someday. He was instantly serious. I could tell by the sudden stillness of his body. I froze too, reacting automatically. I don't think that would be possible for us because it would be too hard for you if I were that close. That's certainly a problem, but that's not what I was thinking of. It's just that you are so soft, so fragile, I would have to mind my actions every moment that we're together so that I don't hurt you. I could kill you quite easily, Bella, simply by accident. If I was too hasty, if for 1 second I wasn't paying enough attention, I could reach out meaning to touch your face and crush your skull by mistake. You don't realize how incredibly breakable you are. I can never afford to lose any kind of control when I'm with you. That's a long roundabout way of him saying I could accidentally fuck you to death.
What a way to go,
What a way to go. Oh, it's such a... Yeah, I know there's one of those lines is in there about... Like, there's some allusion to, like, her being... Like, him needing to be careful and that sort of thing. But I think it feels more in reference to him not losing control, as Bella referenced. But in the book, it's explicitly... He goes on to be like, no, well, that, but also... I've been crazy strong, and I could just, like... thrust a little too hard
like,
and
obliterate you.
Your pelvis is powder. Like, I don't. Yeah, it's a weird scene that the movie did not include, which
God,
I thought was funny.
Here's a random thing. about Bella that we lose in the movie. She can cook.
Yeah. She cooks frequently
in the book. And I realize it's in an awkward place in my notes because I realized it after like the third time that they go to the diner, her and her dad.
Yeah.
I was like, she's not cooking.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I guess we lose that too.
Yeah.
Doesn't know how to cook. Cool.
Yeah, she cooks dinner constantly.
Yeah.
And like is actually a good cook is like a whole thing in her in the book. When Charlie and Edward meet up in the book, when they meet for the first time in the book, they don't do the dumb dad with a shotgun thing that the movie does.
Yeah.
The movie doesn't lean into it as hard as I was worried they were going to at first. But when Edward shows up, her dad is in his living room cleaning his hunting shotgun. And he's like, all right, let me meet Edward. And he like whoosh, whips it shut.
Yeah.
But he does set it down and just goes and talks to Edward like a normal human being. Because I was really worried for a second he was going to carry it out there and do the world's worst trope about like conservative dad with a shotgun meme. It's a terrible trope, and the movie dances around.
The movie
it,
nods to it.
Yeah,
they don't really see it through, but there's a definite nod there.
Yeah.
So eventually we get to the point where evil vampire James has decided that he's going to hunt down Bella
because he is a hunter.
He's a hunter. Tracker.
Yeah.
And now that he knows the Cullens are all bent on protecting her, he just can't resist. And I hated this in the movie.
We both had this note.
The movie just completely skips over the fact that the really good plan for escaping him and making sure her dad is safe, and it works, is all Bella's idea.
Yeah.
Every single bit of it.
Yeah. Like, she's driving away, and Edward, it's one of the only times she gets a ton of I want to say the only time she gets a ton of agency in the book, but it is in this moment with the utmost stakes, we get to see her once again, be a competent, capable person.
Yeah.
She comes up with this plan. They're driving away, and Edward's like, we got to get out of here. And she's like, stop, my dad. And he's like, no, he's ignoring her. But they're in the car with Alice and maybe Emmett or somebody.
Is there, yeah.
And she's like, no, they'll get my dad. And she goes through this whole process. The whole plan, it's a similar plan in the movie.
They do like almost the same
thing. But in the movie, it's the Cullens that come up with it.
Yeah.
It's Alice and Carlisle and Edward.
Yeah.
And just all of them kind of piecemeal it together. Where in the book, yeah, Bella comes up with the whole thing. And then the Cullens are like, no, that's a good idea. Like Alice is like, that's a good idea. And then Emmett's like, you got to listen to her, Edward. That's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And then like, so it's her. In the movie, she's just like on his arm, like, what do I do? Save me. It's bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's real bad. I don't know if you noticed this, but I thought it was great. Alice, a true queen, asks Bella for consent before picking her up. Yeah. And there's a reference in the book. I felt like it felt a little self-aware, but not maybe self-aware enough.
It was like hedging on self-aware.
Where in the constantly throughout the book, Edward just snatches up Bella and drags her around, like literally, like picks her up and throws him over his shoulder, and just like carries her around.
Yeah.
Sometimes to her protesting. They're getting ready to leave to go run somewhere, and this is the moment. I heard nothing, but then Alice stepped through the front door and came toward me with her arms held out. May I? She asked. You're the first one to ask permission. I smiled wryly. She lifted me in her slender arms as easily as Emmett had, shielding me protectively, and then we flew out the door. So yeah, be like Alice.
Be an Alice,
everyone. But yeah, she asked her permission. I was like, fucking, of course.
Yeah.
It's like just bordering on a little bit of recognition.
It was almost Stephanie there. Meyer. She was almost there.
Just one more line of Alice being like, yeah, I need to talk to them about that. Like, or something. Like, I've been meaning to talk to them about that. Or, just like...
Or like, yeah, Edward can be kind of a dick.
Yeah. Or something. To just acknowledge it, but like, you acknowledge it, but don't like comment on it in any way. It's like, all right.
So there's a part when she's hiding out with Alice and Jasper in the hotel in Phoenix. And Alice, I don't think we've talked about this yet.
Is clairvoyant.
Yes, her special power is that she can see like visions of the future.
If you don't know a lot about this series, each of the vampires, seemingly all of them.
Only some of them have like special powers.
Almost all of the Cullens.
No, only Edward and Alice.
No, she goes through a whole list of like Jasper like radiates like
Jasper
calmness like to people. He can like control moods. Don't. I thought Emmett had a similar
He's like really strong.
I thought like most of them, he went through and lists like some kind of vague. Alice and Edward have the most like specific, like Edward can read minds, Alice can see the future.
Yeah.
But other ones have some vague forms of different abilities, and they talk about how that happens, and we'll maybe get to it. I don't remember. I think I have a note about it later. But Alice can see the future. Yeah. That's the point.
So she has visions of the future, and there's one point where she sees something based on a decision that James has made. She sees like a room, and she's sketching it out, and Bella's watching her, and then all of a sudden Bella's like, the phone goes there, or the lamp or something. I don't remember exactly
some
what
object
she says.
goes
and
there.
It turns out that it's her mom's house.
Yeah.
And I thought that could have made for a really cool, like, dramatic moment in the movie, but we totally blow over that.
No. Yeah, I didn't think about that. I remember that scene from the book, and then when I saw your note about it, I was like, oh yeah, that would be a really good moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that moment, it is like that, like they're all like leaning in, watching, like looking, trying to figure out what she's drawing, and then Bella goes, no, the lamp goes there, and like points, and they're like, and they all look at her.
I'm like, oh shit.
What? She's like, that's my mom's living room.
Yeah.
But no. It's because we don't actually go to her mom's house.
That's true. Yeah, they skip out on that.
They skip on that a little bit, but it works.
Which we don't actually go to her mom's house in the book either.
Yeah, she does. Bella goes to her mom's house and then she goes into her mom's house to get to the phone, sees a phone number written on. This is what happened. James tells her, go to your mom's house by yourself. You'll go to the phone and answer the phone. And she goes inside and she gets a key out from under the doormat or something, goes inside, answers the phone, and James is there and says, okay, go to that old ballet studio. It doesn't really make sense. It's an extra step that's unnecessary, but that is absolutely what happens in the book.
Maybe that's why I don't remember it.
It's an extra step that doesn't really make a lot of sense because he also just talks to her on the phone.
Yeah, because he talks to her on the phone while she's at the hotel, too.
But he has her go home first, and then...
I guess that all just, like, melded together.
And then she picks up the phone and calls a number that's on a whiteboard in the room, and then he tells her to go to the ballet studio. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless there's some sort of weird thing about, like, he's trying to, like, not have them track her or something. I don't know.
Another thing that the movie skips out on that's interesting about Bella is that once she decides she's going to sacrifice herself to try to save her mother from James, she's clever enough to shake Alice and Jasper in the airport.
Yeah.
She knows that there's like a multi-level bathroom in there.
With multiple exits.
And purposefully goes off with just Jasper so that he doesn't go into the bathroom with her. Yeah. And then like goes down and out and jumps right in a cab.
Yeah. In the movie, she just looks at him and walks away. When they're checking out of the hotel, she just, like, leaves early. It's like, bye. Yeah, it's... Again, I don't mind some of the streamlining that the movie does at the end, because I think it just kind of helps clean things up a little.
No, I agree.
But again, this is one of those moments that is streamlined at the
expense of her characterization.
Which is a thing that happens numerous times throughout the course of the movie.
So when she finally does meet up with James, it turns out he never had her mother at all, and he was using a
big ruse. He was using a VCR.
Big ol' ruse. He was using a home video.
From like Christmas or something.
Yeah, from when Bella was a kid.
And it's her mom like, Bella, where are you, Bella? And that was what he played on the phone.
And one of the things, and we can talk about this here, or we can talk about it later, the way that his face is described as changing when he's like about to kill her in the book, where it talks about how like his smile just got like wider and wider until it was like all very glistening teeth, I thought was really creepy and compelling. Yeah. And the movie, probably due to budgetary reasons, doesn't do anything like that, which is disappointing because I think with the right deft hand, it could have been really scary.
It would have to be subtly done and done in just right, but that's something that would take a lot of time in post to get just right. So we don't get it. One of the things that I did not love in the movie that I thought was better in the book is that they, because of the nature of books, is that when Bella is dying and Edward shows up, she has been bitten at this point by James. He's bit her hand, and so she's got the venom in her, and she's going to turn into a vampire, and she's also bleeding out and stuff. But Edward shows up, and Carlisle's like, you got to suck the venom out which doesn't work.
Like a snake bite.
I mean, like a snake bite, which is not a thing you should do. But
apparently it's fine for
maybe
this.
It works with the whatever. Sure, maybe it works. It's magic. Who cares? Fine. But he's doing it, and as he's doing it in the movie, we cut to like this weird music video montage, flashbacky, like there's like singing. It's like not only is it music like montage, it's like a pop song. Like there's like it's like lyrics.
It's weird.
It doesn't do a lot for me. It felt a little cheesy and very much dated. The film in like the mid 2000s in a way that wasn't ideal. And so, yeah, I just didn't, the book just, he sucks the venom out and then she passes out and we don't know what happened. The weird montage music video was not good. And then finally, my last note is that we get everything's, well, she lived, we're all fine. Let's go to prom. They all go to prom. And it's similar in the movie and the book. But one of the things in particular is that Jacob shows up in both the movie and the book. In the movie, though, he shows up while Edward is off doing something. And
he emerges from the forest.
He emerges from the forest. Woof. Because obviously, I don't know whose decision that was to just have him. I guess I think you're probably right. You have a note later about it being like an allusion to the fact that he's like a wolf. But is he yet? I don't think.
He's not. So
it doesn't make any sense because it does feel like a little bit like the filmmakers are like, he's one of the natives. He comes out of the woods. Who cares? They come out of the woods, right? That's where they live, the woods. He comes out of the woods. I don't know. That's just my idea of what some dumb producer said. Who knows? But so he walks out of the woods and he's talking to her, and then Edward shows back up and is like, hey, let's go. And shuffles her off.
Yeah.
Basically, Jacob's just there to warn her again about Edward. From his dad is like, tell her to break up with Edward and be careful. But the big difference in the movie and the book is that in the book, the same scene happens, but they're already in the prom and her and Edward are dancing. And then Jacob walks up and says, can I cut in? And Edward goes, yeah, and leaves.
Yeah.
And that little distinction between that moment and from what happens in the movie where he just is not there, and then when he gets back, he's like, ugh, like, get out, he's like, oh, we done here? Get out. Like, he instantly shuffles her off. It goes such a long way in making him feel a little less like a fucking, like, super, like, protective, possessive asshole.
Yeah.
That, like, he's okay with his girlfriend dancing with another dude for 30 seconds. It's just it's a little thing, but
it's a little thing, but it goes, a long way to making him a little bit more palatable.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is funny because in general, I think he's slightly less obnoxious in the movie.
Yeah.
Like his character, the way he comes off is less obnoxious in the movie. So it is weird that particular scene, which is one of the only main redeeming moments, that and the whole asking questions thing are like the two big like moments that make you even kind of like Edward, at least for me, in the book. And so I thought it was weird to not include that in the film. It's dumb. Bad. All right. That was it for Better in the Book. Let's go ahead and talk about what was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
The movie doesn't start with Genesis 2:17, which is not my favorite Bible verse. I don't have a ton of favorites, but that's the whole the temptation of Eve bit about the eating from the tree of good and evil, knowledge of good and evil, and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to get into a lot of it here, but I'm not a big fan of the Genesis story in general, and particularly that narrative of the idea of the knowledge of good and evil being something you should avoid, and thus Bible scholars come at me, but it's not into it. And so starting your story with that doesn't do a lot for me. But anyways.
So the first voiceover lines in the movie are the same tease at the ending that we get in the book, where Bella's like, oh, I'd never given much thought to how I'd die, blah, blah, blah. But the movie also starts out by teasing the idea of like the vampires and them hunting with like the deer and like it being chased through the woods by something, which I thought
and we're not sure what.
Yeah.
And we don't know what.
And I thought that was like an interesting compelling way to start out.
Do not love the way that scene ends. I think it's a fine scene, but the way that the deer like leaps through the clearing and then like somebody like bear hugs it.
Yeah.
It just looks, again, budget, I think, issues. Yeah. It just looks kind of cheesy. It didn't look as dramatic as I think it should have. But I think it's a good way to open the movie. I thought introducing Jacob early in the movie, when he comes and they deliver the truck that Charlie bought for Bella from the blacks. Jacob and Billy come and deliver it, which makes perfect sense. In the book, it's just there.
Yeah, it's just already there at the house.
And Charlie's like, oh, I bought it from Billy Black or whatever. I think it made perfect sense and was a good idea to introduce particularly Jacob, but Billy and Jacob earlier in the narrative and kind of set them up and let us know who they are.
Yeah, because in the book, we don't interact with Jacob until they meet up on the beach. Right? We don't ever see him earlier than that.
No, that's the first time she meets him. There's like, they might reference, she mentions.
Right, they knew each other when they were like kids, but haven't seen each other for a really long time.
And so when she gets the truck, like we hear her inner monologue about how like, oh, Billy and his son Jacob, we used to play. Like, I think it's like we get a mention of Jacob, but we don't like meet him, basically. So
when we're first introduced to the Cullens, when they come into the cafeteria and Jessica...
Yeah,
played by Anna Kendrick. Anna Kendrick's in this movie.
Yeah,
has an iconic line. She's introducing them, and she's like, Jasper, the blonde one, who always looks like he's in pain.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good line, and he does. That actor does. We mentioned it in the prequel, but if you didn't listen to the prequel, that guy was almost Edward Cullen.
Almost.
He was one of the last four.
Maybe he was too good at looking like he was in pain instead of looking like he was smelling something bad.
Yeah. So one of the things the movie does that's a big improvement on the book is that we get a scene very early on of a guy working at a dam running from something and being hunted by something. And then we see him being caught and killed by some people or something. We can't really tell. It's a mystery.
Yeah, it's kind of filmed like from below, and you can kind of like see upwards.
And like, it looks like people's legs. Yeah, it looks like people's legs,
but it's hard to tell what's really happening. Yeah. But we see him like get cornered and taken down.
Yeah, and I think setting up that mystery and that intrigue and some sort of potential threat that we're expecting to come back early in the film is a good idea because the book doesn't do that.
Yeah,
the book does the whole plot with the. James and Laurent and Victoria, they literally, there's one mention at one point of Edward mentions that Alice saw some people coming.
Yeah.
There's one mention of it, but that's it. And then they just show up in like the final 60 pages of the book or something. And then that whole thing plays out.
Yeah.
Maybe last 100 pages.
It's whatever. like the last quarter.
There's 500 pages and it's like the last 100 pages. They show up at the baseball game and then we get the ending, and it's similar to how the movie.
There's nothing about them prior to
building.
That. Yeah, and I think the movie gave a really good choice to kind of thread that idea of the threat throughout the movie.
We get like two scenes. We get that first one that's like completely mysterious, and then we get a second one where they kill a character we've met before and we actually see them.
Yeah.
And so now we know that they're like people, and these are people. They're going to be a problem. Like these are vampires who kill people, and so we know for sure. Like they give us, it's the rule of threes. They give us those 1, 2, and then they show up.
Those
in the
three
third.
little breadcrumbs.
Yeah,
and then they show up and wreck some hell at the very end of the movie.
Yeah. The dumb little golden onion prize in the movie I thought was a fun little detail. There's a mention, it's the same scene in the book and the movie when they're in the biology class at one time where they do this thing where they're looking at different phases of onion growth, like cellular growth, and they're like, whoever can most quickly determine what slides or which phase of whatever, it doesn't matter, gets like a prize. And it's he gets the gold onion. And then they're doing the thing, and then we don't see how it wraps up. But then the next scene, they're walking down the hall, and Bella's holding the onion, which I thought was a fun little, like, again, it's not like a more direct reference to the fact that she is intelligent, but because they're kind of working together, and it's weird. But I thought it was a little detail that was, like, kind of interesting.
But I think it's always interesting when a movie can, like, remember things like that. Yeah. Even just scene to scene and, like, move a little detail like that forward.
And it's also just, it's one of those things that makes your movie feel more real.
Yeah.
Like, just weird little details like that don't mean doesn't add to the plot at all, doesn't mean anything, it never comes back in any way, but it does feel like a thing that would happen, and it builds the world into a more realistic feeling place.
I mean, I would have loved to see it later, like sitting on the floor in her bedroom or something.
Who knows? Maybe it is.
Maybe it is, and we just weren't looking for it. I'm not watching this movie again to look for the golden onion, but...
Because that would be a real funny thing if it was, if they were doing garlic,
oh my God.
And then that came back, and there's a moment at the end of the movie where, like, she gets cornered by James in her bedroom, and she's got that stupid golden garlic thing, and she, like, picks it up, and it's actually garlic, and she, like, hits him with it, and he's like, ah! Like, that would be funny.
Oh my God.
But
Stephenie Meyer, why didn't you make it garlic? That would have been so much funnier.
I assume because garlic's not an issue for them, I don't think.
No, but that's like a common vampire lore.
The joke would have been funny.
Yeah, the joke would have been great. Come on, Stephenie. Get with the jokes.
So the car accident in the book, I don't understand what was happening. I have it embedded in the movie because it's easy to tell what's happening and it makes sense. I want to read a little bit of this because I felt like it was very poorly written.
It's very hard to follow. There's too much description of action, I think, which is hard to do for the strongest of writers. Action is one of those things, like, less is more. And there's too much in the book. It's really hard to follow.
Here's this little brief moment where she almost gets hit by the van. I saw several things simultaneously. Nothing was moving in slow motion the way it does in the movies. Instead, the adrenaline rush seemed to make my brain work much faster, and I was able to absorb in clear detail several things at once. Edward Cullen was standing 4 cars down from me, staring at me in horror. His face stood out from a sea of faces, all frozen in the same mask of shock. But of more immediate importance was the dark blue van that was skidding, tires locked and squealing against the brakes, spinning wildly across the ice of the parking lot. It was going to hit the back corner of my truck, and I was standing between them. I didn't even have time to close my eyes. Just before I heard the shattering crunch of the van folding around the truck bed, something hit me hard, but not from the direction I was expecting. My head cracked against the icy blacktop, and I felt something solid and cold pinning me to the ground. I was laying on the pavement behind the tan car I'd parked next to, but I didn't have a chance to notice anything else because the van was still coming. It had curled gratingly around the end of the truck, and still spinning and sliding, was about to collide with me again. A low oath made me aware that someone was with me, and the voice was impossible not to recognize. 2 long white hands shot out protectively in front of me, and the van shuddered to a stop a foot from my face, the large hands fitting providentially into a deep dent in the side of the van's body. And then it goes on. Then his hands moved so fast they blurred. One was suddenly gripping the underbody of the van, and something was dragging me, swinging my legs around like a rag doll till they hit the tire of the tan car. A groaning metallic thud hurt my ears, and the van settled, glass popping onto the asphalt exactly where a second ago my legs had been. And I'm not sure what all occurred there.
It's impossible to follow.
It's a little rough.
Part of it is that we don't know, like, where she's oriented in space the entire time.
And then the tan car comes out of nowhere, and I'm like, well, I don't remember this tan car. I don't know where it is in relation. She said it was next to her car.
It's next to her, so she's on the other side of it, but then how is the van still coming towards her?
After it hits her truck?
After it hits her truck, if there's a tan car there.
And then it's
because it would just hit the car.
Yeah, the van was still coming. It had curled again around the end of the truck, and so it hit her truck and then kept coming, and then it stopped, but then maybe it tipped over?
I don't know.
Because then he moves her, and she says, somebody grabs the van and drags her, swinging her legs, which hit the tan car, and then a groaning metallic thud hurt my ears, and the van settled exactly where her legs had been. So did it tip, or did it... I don't know. I had a really hard time contemplating, like, what was happening. Obviously, she almost gets hit by a van.
Right. It's difficult to parse for something very simple.
Yeah.
She almost gets hit by the van. Edward stops it from happening.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what happens in the movie, and it's very easy to follow and still, like, very impactful.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. And it makes way more sense.
There's a scene in the movie where Bella thinks she sees Edward in her room at night, and like maybe she actually does, but then like she kind of like jolts awake and she's like, oh, I dreamed that he was in my room, which I thought was an interesting way to like tease the he's watching her sleep
yeah.
thing. And this is kind of random, but the scene made me think of it for some reason. I thought the movie overall did a good job of handling the fact that no one is going into this without already knowing that the Cullens are vampires. There's no element to mystery here because
not really.
The book got so big.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe there were some people, but I imagine very few people were going into the movie.
Yeah, it's a vampire book.
Not already knowing that this was the vampire book.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that the movie does pretty well is it tones down how much of a smarmy, chuckling, patronizing dickhead Edward is throughout the course of the whole beginning of this book. But Bella still can't help fall for him. Again, the only thing that makes you like him in the book is those very brief moments where he spends a day or two finding everything out he can about her from her. Mm-hmm. But the rest of the time, I cannot express enough. Might as well mention it now. There's been memes about it. How much Edward laughs and smirks and chuckles and like every time he talks, it's some manner of smarmy, chuckly, laughy smirkiness. Every time.
Yeah.
It's infuriating. Like, I think it's supposed to be endearing. Mm-hmm. I think it's supposed to be like the cool guy thing. And I get it. I definitely went through a phase in high school where I thought that was cool, for sure. So like, I get it, but man, it's obnoxious because it's every time he talks, it's like, Edward answered and the edges of his mouth turned up slightly into a roguish smile, and he chuckled. It's like, oh God, he's condescending and patronizing. Mm-hmm. Like he just
very.
He can't deal with the fact that he's knows everything and is a million years old and is undead, and like she's not. He just is he's a jerk like the whole time. This negging works the book. Like he doesn't like completely neg her, but kind of.
Yeah,
it's rough. I couldn't stand it. And the movie, so why it's better in the movie is that the movie tones that down quite a bit. He comes across more awkward and unsure of how to interact.
Yeah.
In the movie, which is slightly more endearing. At least it's less obnoxious. Yeah. If not like more endearing, he's less obnoxious than how I read him in the book, which is entirely, completely just the worst.
I saw a tweet not too long ago that was like, Edward makes way more sense if you consider that his prefrontal cortex or something like that never developed past 17.
Yeah.
Which honestly is a headcanon that I'm willing to like consider.
I think that's what they're going for, and I think it's also a way to make it the whole age thing less problematic is that he is kind of still stuck in the same, and I think that is I think true, like developmentally.
he never got past that stage.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, and I think that's even not necessarily like has to be a headcanon thing. I think that's a little bit, it would have to, it's either what she's going for or she's just completely unaware of how awful of a character she wrote. It's one of the two. I don't know. I'm just saying, I think it would make sense if that is somewhat what she's going for, where he is kind of perpetually stuck a little bit. Yeah. Some aspect of him is perpetually 17, which, is obnoxious to read when you're 30, but
yeah,
I'm sure 15-year-old
I
you was
didn't mind it when I was 15. And 15 years, lots of experience, couple significant others later, I'm like, yeah, this is not something that I would put up with.
No.
But at 15, I was like, oh, he's a hot guy. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, he's mysterious.
He's mysterious.
He's funny.
Yeah.
If you laugh a lot, people just assume you're funny, even if you're not. I made a whole YouTube career off of it.
Got him?
Got me. Woo! Oh, man. They made as we talked about this in the prequel, the cover of Twilight, the book. We did a social media post for it, which you should follow us on social media if you haven't. But the cover of the book is two hands holding an apple. The hands are in black and white and very stark, marbly white.
Very recognizable cover now.
Yes, and they're holding a bright red apple and offering it forward. And now this is obviously probably most likely a reference, not an actual thing necessarily. The cover is probably just more like a vague reference to like the Genesis quote, the good and evil, the apple in the Garden of Eden, blah, 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 those sort of things. But in the book, there was a moment where they're having lunch and Edward hands Bella an apple. And as we were reading the book, I was like, my headcanon, Katie, is that the cover is when Edward hands her the apple.
He hands it to her cupped in two hands like a weirdo.
Yeah, that was my hot take. And then we were watching the freaking movie. Actually, the trailer, because it's in the trailer, but then also the movie. And there's a moment in the cafeteria where she drops an apple, and Edward kicks it and catches it and holds it out to her, and his hands are holding that apple exactly the same way the hands on the cover are holding the apple. The movie made my headcanon about Edward being the hands on the cover with the apple actual canon. That is what it is. The movie doth say it and proclaim it. Thus it is true. Just saying. I couldn't believe that when I saw it.
Your headcanon became canon.
My headcanon became canon. I'm sure I wasn't the first person to say that, but I was like, oh, he gives her an apple. I was like, oh, maybe it's him giving her the apple on the cover. Even though it kind of looked like feminine hands, it's got to be him. And then the movie was like, it is him. And I was like, thank you, movie.
But and now Edward also fairly frequently uses kind of feminine descriptors for him.
He definitely has
He's often described as like being elegant and having like long, slim fingers.
Graceful. No, he's definitely, I think she was going for very much sort of a...
I think he's described more frequently with masculine coded language, but...
For sure. But I think there's definitely some intentional androgyny in sort of... He's so beautiful that it doesn't matter what gender he is. It's like, it would be my guess at kind of what, like, the idea is. Maybe not Stephanie Meyer writing that, but, like, you could see the idea... Like angels sometimes in media are, like... The idea isn't whether or not their features are masculine or feminine. And I think I'm a gender abolitionist, so I'm all here for it. But gender is a construct. Tear it down. Unless it's important to you, then embrace it. But my point being that I think that, they were going for a sort of... He's just... If you're that attractive, you're that beautiful, like
you transcend
the
gender
idea
binary.
Of like the gender binary and like masculine and feminine like traits. Like you move beyond that into this weird... Again, it's why I think in a lot of media, like angels are portrayed sort of androgynous a lot, and that sort of thing is that you're beyond this like our petty like human weird gender identities. Like it's... I think that's what... I think that's the idea, and I think it is... It's interesting. That's definitely not what Stephanie Meyer was going for.
Oh, no,
in
absolutely
any way.
not.
I'm just... So, probably the biggest thing the movie does well, in my opinion, is the pacing. It's written and paced like a film, like a Hollywood film, relatively speaking. They're pretty faithful to the book, but the first 300 pages of this book... While I didn't hate it, are a little tedious. Yeah. And it drags. And I get what she's going for. She's setting up their relationship, but it really needed some more things going on. I did now. Maybe if I'm 15 reading it, I don't care. But for me now, I needed more going on. And I think the movie does a better job of just moving things along.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think the movie's pacing is much better. Yeah. I think the movie is occasionally disjointed, but I think that's because we're missing Bella's inner monologue and not because of the pacing. Right. But the book's pacing is slow. Yeah. Now, I will say that as someone who read this at 15 and liked it a lot at 15, part of the draw, at least for me, was that when you're younger, I think you have a lot of people have like kind of this simultaneous experience of having a lot of emotions, but also not having experienced anything like this. And I think this kind of story ends up being a good outlet for that.
Yeah.
For being able to, like, place yourself into this very, like, heady story of a very intense relationship that matches what you're feeling. But also, like, you're never going to experience anything like this. So it's kind of an escapist fantasy.
Yeah. For sure. I think you're right. I think that makes sense. It's funny because I think a lot of times you could think that when you're that age, you could find something like this boring and that adults are better able to appreciate a more methodical, slowly paced thing. But I think there's truth to what you're saying in the sense of at that age that something like this, when you're escaping into it,
every detail is tittillating.
Yes.
When you're at that age.
You're living in it. And so it because you identify with it so closely, you can sit and dwell in it. And I felt similarly, to compare to my experience, I was probably around close to the right age when I was reading Order of the Phoenix, which is notoriously considered by many like the most boring Harry Potter book because it's the longest one, I think. Maybe that. No, I think it is the longest one.
I think it is the longest one.
Yeah.
But yeah, we spend a lot of time.
And we spend a lot of time stewing and exploring Harry's relationship with people and the differing dynamics. And I remember really liking that book. I read it a lot. I read all of them a lot when I was a kid, but I remember really enjoying Order of the Phoenix and not finding all that stuff boring. And I don't think I found it boring when we reread them 2 years ago. But I do think that you're right, that when you're in the age range that the story is about, and you're dealing and you're identifying very heavily with what's going on, or at least wanting to identify very heavily with what's going on, that it can be very compelling even if nothing's happening.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In a way that it might not be for somebody who's 30. And he's like, all right, I've been there, done that. I don't need...
It also helps to not being experienced enough either in life or in media to key into some of the more problematic aspects. Yeah, you're
not seeing the pitfalls. You're not seeing the obvious warning signs.
Yeah, you're seeing the heady romance.
Yeah.
And something that is so intense. Yeah. And that's how you feel. You feel intense too.
You're intense.
Everything is intense.
Yeah, it's the same reason everybody complains about Harry in Order of the Phoenix when they're 30 and about how much of a whiny bitch he is, but when you're 15, you're like, yeah, right, that's what I'm saying. You yell at them, Harry. They don't fucking understand you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because everybody's like that. You know what? If you don't think that you were a whiny bitch at 15, I've got news for you. You were a whiny bitch at 15.
A whiny person. Let's not use gendered insults here. I thought there was a little tiny detail that the movie did that I thought was really good, though, is that they give Bella a specific reason to go to the bookstore in Port Angeles. She ends up, after Jacob tells her about the story of the Cullens and the Cold Ones and whatnot, she Googles, like, Quillet legends or something, and finds a book at a local bookstore, but it's in Port Angeles, and she, like, writes it down. And so in the book, she just gets up there to Port Angeles with her friends and decides to go to a bookstore because she likes books.
Yeah.
Like, she's just like, oh, I'm going to go find a bookstore because she wants to find some books or whatever, which is fine. But I like that in the movie they give her, like...
Right, she's like on a specific mission to get this book. And it's the thing
that makes sense. Like, because she doesn't go immediately... Because in the book, she kind of goes immediately from that story that he says to, like, Googling vampires.
Right.
Whereas in the movie, she goes from the story he tells to doing more research about their culture and like maybe what this story is. Like, seems like a more direct one-to-one, and then eventually that gets her to vampires, which I thought made more sense.
I will say, when she goes to the bookstore in the book, she like looks it up beforehand, so she has the address, and then she gets there and it ends up being like a metaphysical shop.
Oh yeah.
And then she's like, yeah, maybe not. Yeah. Which kind of would have been funny in the movie to like see her arrive and then be like,
yeah, it's like a they sell like crystals and like tarot cards and stuff. Like, it's that kind of bookstore, and she's like, I'm good. But so one of the things she does when she does doing research is that we get another sweet montage, kind of like a mini montage.
I really liked this part
too. Yeah,
like where she's researching the vampires online, and it's like set to music, and we get some like really creepy visuals. I thought it was a whole vibe.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It felt very early 90s or like late 90s, early aughts TV to me. It felt like a scene out of Buffy.
It did, yeah.
Like where they're like doing research on vampires and there's like articles flying by and there's like dramatic music and then like her eyes. Like it's very dated, but it felt dated to a time before this movie, which made it feel cool, like a weird kind of callback, or like a fun callback. And yeah, I thought it was interesting. And then it ends on like a fun little like 18th century vampire dream that she has, where she's like dreaming about Edward sucking her blood, but they're like all in like, they're like 18th century nobles or something.
They're like Interview with the Vampire. Vampire.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. It was fun.
So after she does her research, she's got this whole thing figured out. She shows up to school and she sees Edward in the parking lot and she like gives him a look and walks off towards the forest and he follows her. And I thought that was a whole vibe too. Like, I thought that moment was fun. I
really liked that moment. I thought it was really fun and it gave her a little bit of a personality that we had been lacking mostly throughout the course of the movie. Yeah, that look she just gives them and they just walk into the woods. I agree. There's something about it that feels very...
It's moody in like the best way.
It is moody in a very good way, for sure. I did like that part a lot.
Now, I do think the lines when they get into the woods, I liked what you had to say earlier about her like specifically naming him as a vampire being kind of like a consent thing, but I do think that most of the dialogue once they get in the woods is pretty cheeseball.
It is all, but a lot of it's from the book, which the lines in the book aren't much are the, you know, like the there's I think it's a lot of similar dialogue from the book, but it is all fairly cheesy and, you know, maybe some of it reads better than it sounds and that sort of thing, which can often be a problem.
So they have their whole they have their come to Jesus scene where she names him as a vampire and they have the whole meadow scene and all that stuff, which we already talked about. And then when they come back to school, I guess like the next day,
they're like the cool couple.
They're like the cool couple, and it's like a great teen movie moment where like they pull up in his car and Jessica's like, "Oh my God."
And Edward gets out wearing fucking the sunglasses I have, the square whatchamacallit.
Ray-Bans?
Yeah, like the Ray-Bans, like the square Ray-Bans,
and like opens the door for her and like they walk in
and he does that
with
thing
like his arms slung around her.
The most classic thing about that, it's a little detail, but to me it is the most classic that scene thing ever, is that when he opens the door, he doesn't look down at her. He opens the door, he looks out and around at everybody as he opens. There's something about that little detail of like opening the door but like looking around it to make sure see who all's watching.
Yeah.
It's very good.
And they're walking in together. And Bella is like, everybody's staring at us. And Edward goes, "No, not that guy. Oh no, he just looked."
Yeah.
Which is like, it's just this great brief moment of levity in the middle of this
otherwise
movie.
Dreary, very serious film. Other than the baseball. That's not serious, but...
Another little tiny moment that I loved, I think was the scene right after this, where she's washing her truck and he's like hanging out with her.
Yeah, and he like jumps off. He's on the roof of it.
Yeah, he jumps off down onto the truck and then he jumps onto the ground. And she's like, "Could you just act human?"
Yeah.
And then he reaches down and just pops a giant dent out of the side of her truck.
Yeah, it was fun.
I mean, honestly, I would watch just that. Just them like interacting with each other as a human and a vampire in like a light-hearted kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. That would have been more of that would have been good. Yeah. And I think that also would have been what we talked about before, just more of those little scenes are the best moments in the movie in terms of establishing their relationship.
Yeah, that's the stuff that sells them as a couple.
Yeah. And isn't just them looking at each other or
and the
staring
story,
in a meadow or
both book and movie, just the story overall needed more of that.
Yeah.
We needed more of those dumb little moments just to sell them as people who like each other.
Who live a normal life most of the time.
Yeah.
So these two scenes in particular stuck out to me in terms of made it very clear that me and Stephanie Meyer probably don't agree about much in the world. I mean, I knew that right from Genesis 2:16 on the first page of the book. But one of the things is Edward mentions that he thinks that the powers that some of the vampires have, himself included, are come from abilities that they had prior to becoming vampires. Like that he was like more perceptive of other people's emotions and stuff before he became a vampire, and then that spiked, which I don't hate that idea. Like that concept of like, oh, if you're particularly good at reading the room,
yes,
and that or if like Carlisle is was a particularly smart, like science-minded person, logical person, that somehow gets amplified and he becomes like a super doctor or whatever. Like, sure, you know, like he becomes a really good doctor, or something like that. I don't hate that idea, but one of the things that Edward mentions is that he goes, Alice, she was psychic before she was a vampire, and so now she's even more psychic. And I'm like, wait, what? Okay, so psychics. I mean, vampires exist, so it's not outlandish, I guess, in this universe that psychics are real. But for me, it felt silly, and the movie doesn't mention it, so I appreciated that. Now, maybe that'll become a thing later if we get more backstory for these characters in later movies or books. I don't know, because we don't get much of like any of their backstories. We get a little bit here and there that Edward tells.
Actually, you reminded me of something that I should have put under better in the book. The movie leaves out Carlisle's backstory,
yes,
which we get, which is a really interesting backstory.
I should have put that. I forgot that. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, when she goes to meet their family, he tells kind of the story of Carlisle and how he turned into a vampire and became a doctor and all that sort of stuff. And that was really interesting. I wonder if we'll get that in a later movie. It seems important. It feels important. Maybe they were just trying to focus on Bella and Edward in this one, and maybe one of the later movies there'll be more backstory of these other characters, because you seem like you're going to need it at some point. We're done with Bella and Edward's like big, you know. When I say we're done, I mean like they've met. We've revealed the mystery. Like, you got a lot of groundwork to get through in this movie. Now that that's done, I feel like we can get to some other more interesting stuff in later ones, but we'll see. But that, I didn't like that she was psychic before she became a vampire. And then also, Edwards denies evolution. He's a creationist in the book, which, I mean, he was born in the 1800s, so maybe, or he was born in like 1900 exactly, I guess. Pretty much, right? Yeah. Because he dies in the 1918 flu pandemic. Yeah. And he's 17. So yeah, he was born like 1900 or 1901. He calls, this is a little thing, but he calls the 1918 flu pandemic an epidemic. And I was like, nope, your dad's a doctor. He would know that it was a pandemic and not an epidemic, but sure. Epidemic is like a more regional, localized thing, whereas pandemic is global. Right. What we're in right now, means. That's what we're doing right now is the whole pandemic thing. That's Although now it may not be anymore. It may be an epidemic in America and just not pandemic. I think it's still a pandemic, but the rest of the world seems to have got it mostly under control. So unlike some of us. But Edward is like, doesn't believe in evolution, and I thought that was stupid. Yeah. He's like, some people say evolution, but he's like, I don't know if I buy that. Things are too crazy and weird. It's like, buddy, that's how. Okay, don't get me off on my college. But atheist
we know
rants about evolution.
We know what we're dealing with here.
I know, and that's my point. Is that this is where it really started to seep through in a couple scenes of like, oh gosh, I could really feel her viewpoints seeping through in a way that, to me, is very unappealing. But
buddy, just you wait. Haven't been saying anything when you've been conjecturing about upcoming books and movies, but kind of wish we were filming this so we could just cut to my face in a few places. So when she goes to meet the Cullens in the movie, I kind of love that they're cooking for her.
Oh, it's adorable.
It's so cute.
We both had this note for better in the movie. It's adorable. It's not in the book. It's not mentioned. Yeah. They are cordial and nice to her, and a lot of the scene plays out similarly, like the dynamic. But in the movie, they are cooking her like a big dinner, and it's particularly cute because they don't eat. Yeah. And so obviously they don't need the food, so they're going out of their way. So
it's been who knows how long since any of them have cooked.
Yeah, I mean, Carlisle says in the movie, he's like, it's our first time using the kitchen. Like, yeah. Which is, I thought that was a cute little detail about to sort of sell how they are embracing her as part of their family and that sort of thing. And yeah, I thought that was a fun little ad from the book.
And I loved, it's such a dumb line, but I think Rosalie at one point says, is she even Italian?
Yeah, because they're cooking an Italian dinner.
And Emmett goes, her name's Bella.
Yeah.
It's so dumb, but I loved it.
So neither of these scenes are in the movie, and I was really happy about it. One, it's the morning after they spend the night together in her room in the book, and then her dad, Charlie, leaves in the morning to go fishing or something, and she goes and like brushes her teeth, and then Edward just picks her up and carries her downstairs to go eat breakfast. It's gross. We talked about the whole thing with Alice asks, and it's the only one that asked before, like bodily moving her,
just manhandling
her. Yeah. And so that wasn't in the movie, which was nice. And then also right after that, they kiss. And this is the moment they kiss is actually the moment of the meme you posted today, which I thought was hilarious. And I didn't mention is that she gets dressed to go meet his family.
Yeah.
And she puts on her best full-length khaki skirt and blue blouse and becomes the world's most beautiful, sexy woman ever in that moment.
The world's sexiest Bible salesman.
Yes. Oh my God. I had the same thought reading the book, and it was so funny. I didn't make a note about it, but when I saw the meme you posted today about that, I lost it because I had that exact same reaction where she's like, she literally puts on a long khaki skirt and a blue blouse. And then Edward's reaction is that he's never seen such a divine,
such beauty,
sexy, exquisite, just, that ankle. Like, he's can't get over it. And it is very Puritan. And yeah, the Mormon jumps right off the page in that moment. But he kisses her then, and she faints.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad they didn't do, because that's stupid. That's dumb. The movie doesn't do that. So, and then when he does get to their house, this is a little detail that I thought was the movie had a lot of these little details that were good. The movie has lots of faults, but some of these little details were clever, fun ads. I talked about the onion thing. We talked about them cooking dinner. This is another one that I thought was a fun thing, is that they get to their house and they're walking up the stairs and there's this big mural on the wall.
This is giant mural.
And you can't really tell what it is. It's like square colors, like thin strips of color in a frame, and it's like squares or something. You're like, what is that? And then you realize, and she's like, are these graduation hats? And he's like, yeah, it's a sentimental thing. They just keep them all. And you're like, because they go to high school over and over and over and over and over, so they graduate over and over and they keep them. That's fun. That's a little fun detail.
What an existence.
Yeah, a nightmare. Oh God. Although, well, it depends. We talked about whether or not, I mean, if Edward still has some of the same emotional maturity, I wouldn't want to do high school again with the same emotional maturity that I had in high school over and over and over again. But like the idea of doing high school again with my current emotional maturity, I think I wouldn't want to do it, but I wouldn't not want to do it.
I feel like
I would enjoy it more.
I feel like you would have fun with it like the first couple times.
Oh,
like redoing high school, like as a beautiful, intelligent, wealthy person who like
the epitome of privilege,
who knows so much more stuff than everybody else does.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would enjoy it the first handful of times, but
I don't even mean in his shoes necessarily. I just mean doing high school again. Like, I just think I would really much more. I would, if I got to do high school again when I was 25 or 30. I think I would just have enjoyed it a lot more than I did when I did high school. I think it was with your emotional maturity and all that sort of stuff. I just think it would be a more compelling, interesting time. I'd know not to get so wound up in stuff that didn't matter. You'd be better at I think I'd be better at making friends and do, all those different aspects that are just hard in high school when you're doing it when you're 14, 15, would be more interesting. That's why college is better than high school. But but even then, the idea of going back and doing that same kind of thing of high school at an older age, I can see the idea of it being interesting, but never 100 times.
No.
But
that first time.
Yeah.
That first time.
Be something else.
Rolling up, not giving a single solitary fuck.
Yeah.
What any of your classmates thought of you. So Edward's bedroom in the book he's like super into music, and they describe that his room has like heavy fabric hanging on the walls,
draped on the walls
for acoustics. I was glad that they didn't go with that in the movie because I was a little creeped out just reading the description of it. It's weird.
It comes across to me like a room out of Grimmauld Place.
Yeah.
Versus like
or like sleek, a murder room.
Or a murder room. But I took it more of like a gothy, like, you know, Victorian weird.
Yeah.
Like there's like drapes all over the walls, and like behind them is like a weird family. Like I really read it like a room from Grimmauld Place, whereas it doesn't fit in with the rest of the house, which I think could also be interesting. But he just has a normal room in the movie.
He just has a normal room. But I also want to take this moment to point out that while the book says he has shelves and shelves of CDs, and now the movie shows like a bunch of different
it seems
music
to be
mediums.
CD, yeah.
I just want to point out that Edward would 100% be a vinyl is the superior medium, hipstery asshole. 100%.
Absolutely.
This is not even open for debate.
They really missed an opportunity there.
Yeah.
There's no way he wouldn't only listen to vinyl.
No way.
No way. No. Yeah. He lived through, it's the most obvious possible like character trait for him as somebody who loves music is that he because he's lived through all the time when he could buy and keep all the vinyl.
And then there's that scene in the book, too, where he, like, dunks on the music from different eras. Yeah. He's like, oh, music in the 70s was terrible.
80s was okay, I guess. Yeah.
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 Ugh.
All right, cool guy.
I thought having them dance in his bedroom was kind of cute.
Yeah.
So it was like a very, like, quote-unquote normal teen movie romance thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was cute. And I also want to go on record as having said that it was really nice to not have to constantly hear about how cold Edward is.
Oh my gosh.
Because that is something that Bella just harps on. He's cold and hard. Great. Yes. He's a statue.
Yes.
Congrats.
Marble, cold, hard,
cold,
chuckle.
hard, alabaster. Greek god.
Yep.
Like, I know I've gone on about what we miss without Bella's point of view, but I did not miss any of that.
No. Yeah, she talks every time. And I mentioned it at one point. I was like, you know, you'd think maybe once Stephenie Meyer could not add the descriptor cold before every time, like in the sentence, anytime Edward touches her, because it's always in there. Cold is always in there. And it's like, oh, I know. I'm aware now that he's cold. I get it.
He's cold.
He's been cold the whole time.
He's
still cold.
Not getting any warmer.
Nope. But okay.
Let's talk about vampires playing baseball.
Yeah.
Because this concept is so bananas that it's ballsy.
Yeah. It's weird. It's a choice.
As if the book version of that wasn't already bananas and ballsy enough, the movie goes the extra mile of giving them, like, matching uniform pieces.
Yeah.
And then sets it to supermassive black hole.
Yeah.
Just, like, all in.
Yeah.
Fuck it, we're all in. I love it.
Yeah. I had this in the movie Nailed It. I think you're right that the movie even dials it up. But I had it in the movie Nailed It because my reasoning being that it's so stupid in the book. You're like, this is the... I say stupid. It's just ballsy and weird and funny and dumb. And the movie just does it unapologetically. It's like, yep, it's stupid and ballsy and dumb, and we're doing it. And we're gonna set it to Muse, because fuck you. Like, what? I agree. I had it in the movie Nail It, but I think it's the same thing. It's so weird and silly, and the depiction of it is exactly what you imagine in the book of them running through the woods, you know, catching balls a million miles away, and then like when they slam into each other and like in midair, and it's all stupid and dumb and great, and like it's just a weird thing.
And while we're on the subject, so they're playing baseball. And the other bad coven of vampires shows up, and they want to join the baseball game.
Yeah.
So is the implication that all vampires love baseball?
Yeah, they must. It's America's pastime, Katie. All American vampires love.
What that sounds like? Did you ever read the Bailey School Kids books? It was like vampires don't wear polka dots. I don't remember. Frankenstein doesn't eat in the cafeteria.
Oh, that
like,
sounds vaguely
like that.
familiar.
I read them like 2nd, 3rd grade.
That sounds vaguely familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
But
this is like a Bailey School kids book. Vampires don't play baseball, but they do. They love baseball. All vampires love baseball.
Yeah.
We should just enter that into vampire lore.
Do you think
like
they have
collective vampire lore.
That might be one of my I'm gonna put a pin in that for my prediction segment for a later movie.
Okay.
It's not gonna be my prediction, it's gonna be my wish segment.
I'm excited.
Is that we see I'll just spoil it now that we see VLB, Vampire League Baseball.
Yes.
They have like the World Vampire Baseball Classic, WVBC, which is like in the World Baseball Classic is where it's like the World Cup of baseball, but it's like that, but with vampires. And from all over the world, they have like a tournament every 4 years or maybe every 10 years where they play baseball together, and they just all play baseball no matter where they are for whatever reason.
Vampires love baseball.
And it could be like the World Cup and the Quidditch World Cup and
yes,
but it's like the World Vampire Baseball Cup. I think that would be fantastic. Just, I mean, you're already leaned into a dumb thing. Just really lean into it. Speaking of the bad vampires showing up during the baseball game, in the book, they're described as just wearing like hiking clothes, like blue jeans and stuff, and like looking kind of generic. In the movie, they have like a whole aesthetic, and I love it.
Oh yeah, they have a great aesthetic.
They have like a great look.
Like
they look like evil vampires.
Victoria with like the big fur vest.
The big fur shawl thing, and just like...
And like Laurent with his suit.
Yeah, he's got the suit, and they're barefoot. And I think they are mentioned as being barefoot in the movie, or the book too.
Yeah, they are.
But they sound way more generic and boring, and they have like backpacks and stuff. They just sound like hikers, basically. But I love that they have like a whole aesthetic in the movie, which obviously they would have to with their big dramatic entrance. But
yeah,
I'm glad they made that choice because it's more fun that way. Also, we mentioned earlier, but the movie really streamlines the ending. I think it makes sense. They just get her to the dance studio. Yeah, and it's less convoluted. They miss a couple details. We miss
a couple cool details, but it is a lot more streamlined and easier to follow.
It makes more sense, and the book has a little unnecessary in like the
convolution, the
trail that the path that we take to get to the climax. In the movie, we actually see James bite her, and then we actually get a fight scene between James and Edward. Whereas in the book, she just kind of like hits her head and realizes she's bleeding a lot, and then feels a searing pain in her hand, and then passes out, and then wakes up in the hospital. Or we get like a
little bit
of the talking of like Carlisle and Edward being like, oh,
she's
you gotta...
kind of like going in and out of consciousness. And
so we don't really know what's happening. We just hear Carlisle telling Edward to like suck the venom out of her hand or whatever. But
yeah, I thought giving Edward a fight scene with James was a good idea.
Yeah, because that's what happened in the book. We just don't see it or know at all what happened. They just like later they're like, oh yeah, we killed James. Oh, okay. All right, fine. Speaking of, Alice rips his fucking head off in the movie, and that's not in the book.
Because Alice is easily the best, most interesting character in this series.
I'm already on board and agree so far. After the first book and movie, I 100% agree. But it's out of nowhere. Edward's about to kill him, and then Carlisle's like, "No, Alice, rip his fucking head off." And then Alice jumps up and just like fucking rips his head off. And I was like, what is happening? Okay. Wait, why is Edward not allowed to kill him, but Alice can just like yoink his head right off? Sure. And then they build a big fire and burn his body in it. But I was unprepared, and they don't dwell on it, and they never address it again, that for some reason they have Emmett, who's like this big hulking monster of a human, and he just holds him while Alice jumps on his neck and rips his... It's very strange. I don't understand why, but
I don't know, man, I'm into it. I'm not mad about it.
I'm not mad about it.
My last note here. It's like a super quirky girl thing, which is kind of annoying, especially in the aughts.
Yeah.
But I appreciated that the movie had Bella just wear a freaking Converse sneaker to prom.
Yeah.
With her leg cast. The book has her wear a walking cast and a freaking stiletto. And that has bothered me since 2006. How the hell would that be accomplished? How would she move?
Edward just carries her everywhere. That makes sense. That tracks with Edward.
I mean, sure, I guess, but she clearly like walks around on her own in that scene in the book. Like, Stephenie Meyer, do you not know what a stiletto is actually?
No.
I guess not.
I mean, this is coming from somebody who the epitome of sexuality is a full-length khaki skirt and a blue blouse and her hair tied back in a ponytail. So, and if that's your thing, I'm not saying that it can't be sexy. I'm just saying that's the level we're operating on here. So, I would go out on a limb and say maybe she's not super well versed on stilettos and their functionality potentially. All right, that was all we had for Better in the Movie. Let's go ahead and talk about what the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
I thought the movie did a really good job with Charlie and Bella and their relationship. Mm-hmm. I think it feels the most close to what we get in the book in terms of like relationship dynamics and how it plays out on screen versus what's written in the book. I think it's easier because a lot of their relationship is not talking and like the not cold, but like sort of an understood quiet basically. And so but I think the movie does a good job accomplishing that. I think the guy Billy Burke, I think is his name, who plays Charlie, did a really good job sort of just doing that awkward, unsure dad who hasn't really been a full-time dad and doesn't really know what to do. And now she's 17 and how do I even... Okay, I'll just be here if you need anything, kind of thing. Like, I thought the movie did pretty good at that.
I have a couple things here. They got the truck right.
Yeah, big red monster,
like vintage kind of truck,
boxy truck.
Mm-hmm. The boys at school like falling all over themselves over Bella for some reason.
Yeah.
Kind of even more baffling in the movie because she's not even really interesting in the movie.
Yeah, but she's not interesting in the book. She's interesting in the book, but we don't see her being interesting necessarily in a way that the other people...
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She's interesting to us because we're hearing her inner monologue and that sort of thing. But there are moments where she's snarky and sarcastic. That was the thing I noticed too. It's like I think part of it is that she's like kind of snarky and sarcastic in the book, at least at times, that they don't really show as much in the movie. And she has a moment where she realizes like these kids aren't getting her sarcasm.
Yeah.
Which I identified with a lot. But yeah, I thought that was so like, I think maybe that's part of it is that she is she's almost like, and she is super pale. That's interesting. She's almost like the female Edward to all these boys. She's this mysterious figure who shows up. She's pretty and kind of snarky and quiet and mysterious, and they don't know anything about her. And so she has that same appeal that Edward has for her.
Okay. I like where you're going with that. At any rate, I thought the movie nailed that aspect of the story.
Yeah.
They also nailed Bella being clumsy and bad at gym class.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which is something you could identify.
Yes. I'm not that clumsy.
Well, no, not that clumsy,
but I was really bad at gym class.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Gym class was terrible.
They go to La Push. I thought the La Push visit, although they add surfing, which I thought maybe it was like a good little ad, because they just kind of go and hang out.
Yeah, they hang out by the tide pools and
which
like make s'mores and stuff.
But in general, I thought like they go to the beach, but it's cold, and like the kind of feel of the whole visit felt similar to me in a way from the book. Yeah. It's not like a fun like really gonna sit out and get some sun on the beach trip. It's like we're wearing beanies and like parkas and wetsuits and stuff.
And always eating red vines for some reason in the movie
because they're crazy delicious. Red Vines clearly paid for some product placement in this movie because they're eating red vines several times in this film. And then also the Port Angeles trip plays out very similar to the book, where she goes and they go shopping for dresses, and that's similar. And then they set up the creepy dudes early on. And then she decides to go to the bookstore, and they get split up, and then the whole thing with Edward, all of that plays out pretty much exactly the same.
Edward saving her from being horrifically gang raped. And then his crazy driving.
Yeah. It's a little more tense in the book. I think that's potentially a slightly better in the book thing, is that the whole scene where she's being followed by them is, to me, reading the book was a little more...
I think it was a little subtler in the book, where she, like, you see them every now and then she realizes what's happening.
I think that's the thing, is that in the book, there's this moment where she feels like they're falling away from her, and like they're not chasing her, and she feels better, and she's like going to get around a corner and thinks she's safe, but then she gets around the corner and realize, and it's like a dead end, or not a dead end, but it's like an empty street, and she sees the two other guys halfway down the street, and she realizes that it wasn't these two guys that were chasing her; they were just like corralling her, basically.
Yeah, she was being herded.
Yeah, which is like horrifying, and like, because you're not sure what's going to happen, and I didn't know that whole scene was much more tense for me in the book, but it's ultimately very similar. So.
Yeah,
and I mentioned it earlier, but I think Kristen Stewart does a really good job in this movie. I'd argue she does a great job. It has to be hard. I mean, I don't think Bella's a good character in the movie, especially compared to the book, where I think she's a relatively interesting character. But I think she does a good job with what she's supposed to be doing in the movie. She does an awful lot of staring, lip biting, and like longing, eye batting and stuff. And there's a lot of nonverbal acting that she does that comes across realistic to me, or at least came across not feeling completely cheesy. At least compared to some of the scenes in the film. Like, in general, when she's like staring at Edward and stuff, and like talking and like awkwardly looking askew and like averting her eyes and feeling awkward, all that stuff felt very natural to me. And to me, I thought, was like kind of impressed with how good of a job she did with that. Again, the character is not good in the movie.
Yeah, and I think it must be pretty difficult to have a role as big as that and not really have anything to chew on with it.
Yeah, she doesn't have like lots of big like monologues. She doesn't get to like be dramatic. She just kind of hangs out and is awkward and enamored of people, which is like a very subtle thing to do well, and I think she does it well. So it's the thing in the book that the movie I thought nailed, is that Edward has like an anger problem. He has like a rage problem. He's like, if I go back there, I'll just murder those guys. And this is super hot to Bella. It's equally problematic in the movie and the book.
And then that's one of those things, like we talked about earlier, that if you're younger, more in the target audience for this, you're not really picking up on that as a red flag. It comes across, at least in my memory, more of as an indication of like passion, and intensity. Which you can read it that way. Which seems very hot, when you're younger and you're not reading it as a red flag,
And it could even be done, that emotion can be done in a way that isn't gross or problematic. I think because obviously there's a good quality to wanting to protect your loved ones. Obviously, like that's a good thing. Like to want to not want any harm to come to the people that you love and that sort of thing. But the way it's portrayed in the book and the movie is, it's less of him wanting, which there is this of him like, I don't know what I do if anything ever happened to you, and I care so deeply about you and all these sort of things. That's a big part of it. But it's also like, he rages out and is like, talk to me about anything so I don't go back there and just rip those limbs off. Like that like extra level of like, not, okay, she's safe now, so you're done with that. This is no longer righteous anger in defense of a loved one. This is now like, I'm just a rage-filled person who wants to murder, like vigilante justice murder people. You know what I mean? Like it's that sort of teetering thing that you get in superhero movies of like, sometimes of like that line between, like with Batman, of like between like justice versus like, oh, you're going too far, like you're going over the edge. And it's it's supposed to be endearing in this book. Like, it's supposed to be a thing that she finds very attractive about Edward. And I get it, but it's gross. It's real gross.
Okay, now I'm having trouble remembering. Because having read this, now I'm starting to remember stuff from the other books, and it's starting to meld together a little bit.
Okay.
In Twilight, you've only read Twilight.
Yes.
Did we find out what Edward was doing for a period of time when he did not live with the Cullens?
Yes. He said he was Dexter for a while. Yeah.
Okay.
He went. Yeah. He does mention that he went when he left Carlisle for a while, and he was eating people, but it was only people he thought were bad people.
Okay.
He mentions that. There's not a lot of detail, but that is mentioned in the book.
Okay. So. I couldn't remember if that was in Twilight or if I was remembering that detail from another book.
No. That is from this one. And yeah, so like there's I get it. I'm this is a whole nother thing. I'm very much not a fan of like vigilante justice and that sort of thing. Retributive justice doesn't get my engine running at all. And so, and a lot of that ties back to a lot of different things, particularly my views on free will, which we've discussed at length. But all that being said, it's still, regardless of any, I think even somebody who doesn't necessarily feel the same way I do about retributive justice and that sort of thing would still find Edward's personality in certain scenes in this book problematic and weird.
No,
like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like, even if you're into, like, revenge and justice, he's, like, over the line and in a weird way that's, like... And the fact that it's portrayed as this super, like, attractive thing is, like, ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh. Red flags.
I agree.
Yeah.
I thought the movie did a good job with Edward's backstory in general.
Yeah.
Like, how he became a vampire.
Yeah, with Carlisle and the pandemic and all that sort of stuff.
Get, like, a flashback.
They kept a couple of lines straight out of the book here. We mentioned one in the prequel, but... there's also this line, which I didn't, when I was reading the book, I was like, I wonder if that'll be in the movie, which is that Edward says, "You're exactly my brand of heroin," to Bella, because he's so addicted to her, which, fair enough. But then, they also have the line, this is directly from the book, and they were going to change it for the movie, but they didn't because Stephanie Meyer was like, people have this line tattooed on their body, which I was like, do they? Oof. All right. I mean, it's a line, I guess.
You do.
If you do, I mean, fair enough. But to me, it's a line. So the lion fell in love with the lamb. What a stupid lamb. What a sick, masochistic lion. I'm assuming most people would just have the first part of that.
Yeah, probably.
Even still, that's a whole ass problematic. That's the same thing I'm talking about. That's the whole. To me, that still embodies the weird, gross, like. Gender role, patriarchal, power dynamic thing that's really gross to me.
Yeah.
In a way that I mean, I can get reading that line in years past and being into it and not reading it in the same way I do now. But reading it now, it's not a big fan.
I thought the movie nailed the Cullens and like their dynamic and how it's like, especially how they interact with Bella. Where you can tell that, like, most of them are, like, all for it.
Yeah.
They're like, woo.
Except for Rosalie.
Yeah. Well, we find out more about Rosalie later.
Okay, good.
Put a pin in her.
I gotta put a pin in that, because I don't know what's going on there. So I was definitely feeling, and I don't know, I feel like I've heard you mention this before, but I could be wrong. When she goes and is introduced to their family, there is some weird, and it's in the movie, which made me I have a whole thing about this later in my prediction segment. But the fact that they thought to put this same weird dynamic in the movie made me feel like there must be something to it and that I wasn't crazy. There's like some strange chemistry between Bella and Alice. That is, I don't understand what it's supposed to be. And now I'm assuming it's not what I feel like it is.
It's not what you feel like it is. It's not what you want it to be.
Okay. Because
it's there.
But why is it there? Is it something else? You don't have to spoil anything, but is it something else, or is it just...
I think it might literally just be the author not really knowing how to write an intense friendship.
Okay. Interesting. I guess it's a friendship thing, but it feels okay. I gotta read. I got the page number here. So this is when Bella and Alice, like, they've talked a couple times, but this is when she's introduced at the house with the family. "Hey, Edward," Alice called enthusiastically. She ran down the stairs, a streak of black hair and white skin, coming to a sudden and graceful stop in front of me. Carlisle and Esme shot warning glances at her, but I liked it. It was natural. For her, anyway. "Hi, Bella," Alice said, and she bounced forward to kiss my cheek. If Carlisle and Esme had looked cautious before, they now looked staggered. There was shock in my eyes, too, but I was also very pleased that she seemed to approve of me so entirely. I was startled to feel Edward stiffen at my side. I glanced at his face, but his expression was unreadable. "You do smell nice. I never noticed before," she commented, to my extreme embarrassment. No one else seemed to know quite what to say, and then Jasper was there, tall and leonine.
Listen.
How does that read any way other than, I don't...
Listen, it's there. I don't think that the author intended it to be what it reads as.
How is that possible?
If I had to guess.
I mean, I believe you.
Like, knowing what we know about Stephenie Meyer. But there's there's a lot of fic out there.
I'm sure there is. But it's not even subtext. It's text in this scene.
It's not even subtle. But
the thing that's weird to me is, like, I don't understand what that's supposed to mean. If that's not some weird allusion to, like, some romantic chemistry.
I think that it is supposed to show us that Alice is comfortable right off the bat with it because she doesn't have to do any guesswork like the others are having to do. I think it's also supposed to be like a quick start to them being really good friends. I agree with you that it reads differently.
Okay.
But don't get your hopes up.
I'm not. I like I said, I know enough about Stephenie Meyer and what I can assume. But it's just the way that read, and then the way it's portrayed in the movie, it happens very similarly.
Yeah.
Like Edward's reaction and everything. And it all feels... Although, I guess my only thought is that this is an allusion to the fact that Alice knows she's going to be a vampire.
Yeah, I think
because that's mentioned in the book, right? At some point, is that Bella says, and in the movie,
Alice
that Bella sees Alice
in the future.
Is in the future, and Edward's like, things can change. And so maybe that's... But even still, it doesn't read that way to me. It just reads like Edward's reaction and everybody's reaction, and every word choice is so specific to read the way it reads. And it, anyways, all right, let's move on. Sorry.
But I think, and I don't really want to get into it because this is already going to be a long episode. We can talk about this later.
Yeah.
Stephenie Meyer is not a good writer.
No, I agree.
And I think that partly what we're seeing here is somebody who is also maybe not particularly well read and maybe doesn't realize that the choices that she's making with her language could be interpreted differently. I don't know if like not being well read is maybe the best way to put that.
But maybe the diversity of the media.
The diversity of the media that she has consumed is probably not great.
Maybe not as
probably not particularly broad. Probably does not include anything with LGBT themes.
But see, I don't even need the LGBT thing. You swap that out. Like, you could write that same scene. Like, if that was Jacob running up to her, you could write that scene the exact same way, and you would very clearly get.
But is she going to pick up on that
when
it's two women?
That's fair.
Or is she just going to say it's just gals being pals?
I guess it's just gals being pals.
It's just gals being pals.
Oh, fair enough. So both in the movie and the book, Edward is a piano player. He plays some nice, delightful little songs for Bella.
Some nice tunes.
He writes a song about her. He wrote a song about her and plays it for her. So that's fun. Does both. In both the movie and the book, he just sort of casually admits to watching her sleep. Mm-hmm. Like it's not a big deal.
It's not weird at all.
He's like, nah, yeah, I watch you sleep sometimes. And she's like, oh.
I'm so flattered.
Okay. Great. Great. And then we're getting to the end here. The big face-off between the covens. When Laurent and James and Victoria show up, they have this big face-off. And then after James smells Bella and, like, she's human, they have this big, like, dramatic...
Where everybody, like, assumes battle stance.
Everybody assumes their battle stances. And it reads in the book... To me, it read in the book silly, which is why I have this in the movie Nailed It, is because in the movie, it's silly. They all, like, drop into animal poses and are, like, growling at each other. And I get it. Like, I get I enjoy this type of media. We've talked about, we've watched, Buffy and Lost Girl, and, like, we're into, like, fantasy and fantasy mixed with real world stuff. And, like, the idea of characters being animalistic and growling and stuff, I think can be done in a way that doesn't feel really cheesy and bad. That particular scene in this movie didn't work for me. But it also didn't work for me in the book. I felt equally cheesy to me in the book, so that's why I had it here. But I feel like you don't agree.
I agree about the movie, but I also disagree, kind of. I think that there is a nugget of something interesting in the book in how Meyer describes their predatory behavior as being kind of feline. And it intrigues me because I think it kind of makes sense in a weird way for vampires to be cat-like. Like, I feel like realistically vampires would be, like, mostly solitary, or maybe they would travel in small groups.
Yeah.
And then pop culture has also set vampires up as the mortal enemy of the classic canine monster,
right,
the werewolf. And I think a better writer could have done something with that idea and made it, like, really interesting and creepy. However, much like their super speed, etc., basically all of their powers, I think it is better off left to the imagination.
Yeah.
And clearly what I was imagining reading the book was not what you were imagining reading the book, because I thought there was kind of something interesting to it.
It was better in the book in my head, but still cheesy was my
thing.
But
and there's just no way to put that on film and not have it be cheesy. Maybe an incredibly deft hand and a very big budget could make them appear like just the right amount of inhuman to pull it off. And I think if you could pull it off, it would be interesting and creepy, but you can't.
Yeah. The thing that we discussed that potentially would have worked, but I think they didn't do for numerous reasons, is that if you do the Buffy vampire thing, which is in Buffy, the vampires look like normal humans, but when they're
like
angry,
when they go
vampire, when they vamp out, they have prosthetics on their face that like make their noses kind of.
They have like eye ridges and like
their noses
look like
widen
they're
out
snarling.
on top, and they look like your classic vampire kind of like demon.
They
makeup
look
thing.
kind of demon-y, animalistic,
demon light mixed with human. And I think if they had done something like that, it would have worked. I think they didn't do that for numerous reasons. One, budget. Two, it's not in the book. Three, they didn't want it to look too much like Buffy or something. So like I get why they didn't do it, but I think that does help sell when they do the growling and snarling and like the more animalistic stuff. It feels less cheesy if they look less human.
Yeah.
Whereas if they just still look like themselves and then they're like, it's like, all right. Like it's just a little silly, but. So the movie nailed the expedition dump of who James is and what he wants and why. It's just Edward in a car driving, going, he's a tracker. I could sense it on him as soon as he walked up. He loves you and he wants to murder you, and he hates that I wanted to protect you and that we all care about you, and he's obsessed and he won't stop until he murders you. Okay, that's the plot. That's worth it. Like that's both the movie and the book do the exact same thing there.
Yeah.
It's just Edward like, I read his mind. Here's what's happening. Like, moving on. Yeah. It's a clumsy in both, I thought. Like, it's, I get it.
For sure.
It's definitely one of those, like, I read his mind and here's the plot for the rest of the book. The movie does nail the Charlie scene when she leaves and bails on Charlie. Like, the entire scene is basically word for word, like, moment for moment, where she storms in and she's talking about leaving and how she's mad at Edward, and she fakes a fight with Edward at the door. and then she's leaving, and then she says the same thing to Charlie that she said to her mom or that her mom said to Charlie when she left, to like really get him to not chase after her and that sort of thing. It's like literally word for word exactly the same scene. And I think it was one of those scenes that in the book I was upset before the scene happened, which was one of the things that was obviously effective storytelling in the book, is that I felt I was not looking forward to reading her upsetting Charlie in that scene.
Yeah.
I liked the dynamic of their relationship, and when she was like, we have to leave in 15 minutes, and I gotta be mean to him. I was like, I don't want to read this. Like, I don't want to read her being mean to Charlie. Like, and I was like, oh, okay, well, there you go, book. You made me feel something. Like, good job. Like, I don't want to read that. And yeah, it was upsetting. It was sad. And the movie, I thought, captured that pretty well.
Yeah. There was a lot about the ending that got changed, but I did like that the movie kept James tricking Bella with the old home video.
Yeah.
I thought that was a clever ruse.
Fun little,
yeah, it's fun.
I feel like I've seen it in something, but yeah,
probably.
But it's fun. And then the last thing I had was that caught the villain monologuing again. He gets her in the room in the ballet studio and he explains his whole plot to her. He's like, "So you're probably wondering why you're here. Well, this tape, your mother, I stole it from your house, and then he goes through his whole plan, and it's okay." Thanks. It's very Harry Potter in that regard, of the villain sitting there explaining everything that has transpired up until this point, and that sort of thing. But it happens in the book and the movie. So, all right, that was it. Whew, we're almost done. We got a couple more segments, but first is a new segment. We're calling it Bryan Predicts the Twilight Saga.
It's gonna happen, Edward. I've seen it.
In order to replace, we don't have What's That in the Book, we don't have Guess Who, we don't have Lost in Adaptation. In order to, add some more diversity here to our entertainment, I thought it would be fun, because I don't know anything that happens in these, if I tried to predict what was going to happen in each concurrent book in this episode. So it's called Bryan Predicts the Twilight Saga, but in this episode, I am predicting what I think will happen in New Moon. I have 3 predictions, and then I have 3 wishes. So I have my predictions of things that I'm like trying to make like an informed, like thoughtful, like prediction of like what I think might reasonably happen. And then my wishes are like things I would like to see happen that probably won't. So my predictions are: 1, in New Moon, Bella becomes a vampire. It almost happened in this one. It's going to happen at some point. It's a spoiler. I do know she becomes a vampire, I think. I actually don't know that. She gets some powers. I don't know. I think she becomes a vampire at some point from cultural osmosis. My guess is that it happens at the end of the next book. Second, Edward, overcome with desire, accidentally eats another human, and Bella has to decide if she's going to forgive him. I think that could be an interesting test of their relationship, because we've kind of gotten their relationship going in the right direction. Obviously, I think Jacob's going to, because it's called New Moon Wolves, Jacob's going to play, and he's on the cover of the movie. Jacob's going to play a major role in the next one. So there's some tension there already. But I'm thinking that there could be some more interesting tension between Bella and Edward if he, for some reason, maybe in jealousy, there's some dynamic with Jacob and Bella, and he gets upset, and then something happens, and he's out, and he kills a human and eats him. And then she finds out about it, and Bella's like, what the fuck? And my final prediction is, I think a Cullen's going to die, but that was too vague. I'm going to narrow it down. I'm going to guess that either Rosalie or Emmett dies. They're together, right?
Yeah.
One of the two of them dies in the next one. That's my guess.
All right. So we have 3 predictions.
Yep.
We'll see how that shakes out.
My guess, if I had to narrow it down to one, I would say Emmett dies, and that cements Rosalie's face turn heel, and she defects to some evil side of that hasn't been introduced yet.
Okay.
Because he's already doesn't like Bella. I could see it going that way. That might make the most sense, because Emmett's kind of nondescript. He's just like a big, strong dude, whatever. And killing him also ups the stakes, because he's like the biggest and strongest. So if he dies, it's like, oh my God, anybody could die. He's so big and strong. And it's more motivation for, I'm betting that Emmett dies, but one of the two. All right, these are my wishes for New Moon. The Ellis and Bella romance subplot picks up speed. Notice I don't say begins, because it's already begun in this book and movie. I'm saying that's really going somewhere. I would wish it was really going somewhere because that's way more interesting. Second, I really hope that we get to watch one of the vampires chew on a dead deer or bear. Ideally a bear, because there's a mention in this book that Emmett hunts bear, and I think that would be funnier. But one of the two, I want to see him. I mean, we see him like catch a deer in the beginning, but I want to see a vampire gnawing on an animal in the next one. And then finally, this is a way out there one, but Mike tries to fight Edward. And since Edward is trying to blend in as a human, he has to let Mike beat the shit out of him. I want to see that happen. I think that would be a fun scene. Something happens, like there's some tension between Edward and Bella. Mike is being the protective friend and still kind of in love with Bella, is going to defend her honor against Edward and challenges to him fight. They get in a fight, and Edward can't beat him up because he could kill him, as we already have established. All right. Those are my predictions for New Moon. We got a few odds and ends, and then we'll get to the final verdict.
I didn't really know where to put Jessica in the grand scheme of our breakdown.
Yeah.
I feel like they nailed her, like, kind of awkwardness and definitely her crush on Mike. But I felt like in the book she was actually a pretty okay friend to Bella. And in the movie it just seemed like she was jealous. Like, I felt like they really upped the jealousy factor in the movie from where it was in the book.
I
like,
a little
bit. That's definitely present in the book, but
it's all we get. It's one of those things where they don't have as much time, so they kind of all we get from her in the movie is the like more of the jealous scenes and less of like them just being friends. We get a little bit of it, like when they go to buy dresses and stuff. But yeah, I don't disagree. We mentioned the sparkling earlier, and this is the pin I put in that. I wanted to bring it back because I thought this would be really interesting. I thought it would be a potentially cool reveal that doesn't go anywhere in the movie or in the book. And I thought this was going to be the case when I first read when he shows up in the meadow, is that if being in the sunlight, so we know in traditional lore, vampires in the sun burst into flames, die. Can't go out in the sun. This one, obviously she needed them to be able to go out in the daytime and it to not be quite so drastic of consequences. Mm-hmm. So they sparkle, which reveals them, but they don't die. I thought it would have been an interesting potential plotline, a thematic element, is if being in sunlight, either one of two things. One, just made them feel really good. Mm-hmm. Or two, maybe more interestingly, meant that they didn't have to feed.
So like they have photosynthesis?
And that's maybe the joke that it easily translates to that makes it silly. But my thought being that maybe being in the sunlight where they sparkle, because he seems to be in a very good mood in that scene. And for a minute, it's made him seem, the reason I kind of came up with this is I thought this is where it was going because he seems very euphoric when he's in the sunlight. And I think it's just because he's in a good mood because of the other stuff happening. But it almost felt like an extra level of euphoria. And I thought, oh, maybe like something with the sun is like, they can't go out in the sun because it reveals them, but they desperately wish they could. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's this interesting dynamic there. And I was like, oh, maybe what if it like if they get enough sunlight, they actually don't need to feed. But they can't go out in the sun because it reveals them. Now, obviously, there's like a sort of a plot hole in that, is if that's the case, they could just all like go live on a tropical island together.
Yeah.
And just like hang out in the sun and like be happy, like chill. So like it doesn't quite work. But I thought there was some element of that idea that could be interesting if it was somehow enticing to them to be out in the sun versus a traditional vampire that just desperately doesn't want, obviously it kills them.
Yeah.
But the idea of being out in the sun is this great thing and makes them feel really good. I think there could be an interesting allegory there. Obviously this isn't the direction Stephenie Meyer's going, but to coming out and openly embracing your identity, and that it feels good to do that, but you can't because society feels like an obvious connection to me.
Yeah.
And I think there's a way that could be worked in a way. And now, obviously, that's not, I don't think, where this is going to go at all. But do you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I think
I think that could be.
There could have been a very interesting, because it's this thing, it identifies them as who they are. It's literally them coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there could have been maybe in a different story.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would work in this story necessarily, in this world that Stephenie Meyer created.
Right.
But yeah, I think there is something compelling to that idea. I just want to bring up how much Edward fucking gaslights Bella.
Yeah. Real hard.
Especially after the truck van crash. And he's like, you don't know what you saw.
No. She's like, but you were, and he's like, nope, I wasn't. Nobody will fucking believe you.
Yeah.
Okay. That's some real hard abuser language. That's like abuser language 101. Like, just right out of the playbook there. Like, they couldn't have written that scene. There's no way they didn't write that scene by just going to, like, a therapist and be like, okay, so, like, or an abuse victim survivor and be like, so what exactly did they say to you? Word for word. Like, just into that scene. Like, holy Jesus. Yeah, it's rough. Bella mentions at one point on page 302, she specifically says, he laughed more tonight, she's talking about Edward, he laughed more tonight than all the time I'd spent with him before. Pardon me, what? Pardon me, excuse me, what? It's literally all he does for the first 300 pages of this book. Every line, every word that he speaks, he is laughing or chuckling or smirking or laughing. He laughed more tonight than... It's like, did you forget the first 300 pages you wrote? Okay, cool, great. Sure.
You know, one thing I really noticed watching this movie was how much I could already tell that Robert Pattinson did not want to be there.
He was like, I was in Harry Potter. I was Cedric Diggory. Best thing that ever happened to me was dying in the first one of those movies I was in. Yeah. There's a line in the book. I almost put this in better in the movie because it's not in the movie, but I just wanted to mention it here. There's a line in the book that feels really gross and weird, and it's not in the movie, so that's good. This is Bella and Edward show up at her house one time, and Jacob and Billy are there. And she's like, what do we do? And Bella says, let me deal with this, I suggested. Edward's black glare made me anxious. To my surprise, he agreed. That's probably best. Be careful, though. The child has no idea. I bridled a little at the word child. Jacob is not that much younger than I am, I reminded him. He looked at me then, his anger abruptly fading. Oh, I know, he assured me with a grin. It's going to be a yikes for me, dog.
Yep, that's pretty weird.
It's going to be a yikes for me, dog.
On a similar note, when they're at the prom, Bella and Edward dance with her, like, balanced on his feet.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's supposed to be cute.
Nope.
But that's like a dad-daughter thing, so that's going to be a no for me.
It's, this, I feel like this book could be called Baggage. That's maybe unfair, but there's definitely, you get the feelings of some very particular, interesting things that occur that are rough.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a couple other things here. The first thing here, this is a rape culture red flag thing. Did you note, reading the book, that Bella routinely blames herself for Edward's actions?
Yes.
Both real and imagined. Because sometimes she'll be like, oh, this could have happened.
Yeah.
And it is always her fault.
Yes.
Because she smells so dang good.
Yeah.
And that is not even a subtle analog to she was wearing a short skirt type of ideology, and men can't control themselves.
No, the parallel between the vampire wanting to eat her. I mean, it's again, it's not even subtext. It's basically just it is technically subtext, but it's basically just text of the parallel, the analog of
of
sex.
It's not subtle.
No, it's not subtle. Is that him eating her is literally sex? Like is them having sex, and yes, it is always framed as something that he can't control, obviously, because he's a vampire, which I mean, and that's what makes it so insidious, is that when you steep it in this weird fantasy thing where it's like he literally is like a bloodthirsty demon, like it's magic, like, yes, like that is true just in this book, like he's a vampire and it's impossibly hard for him to control his desire to eat her. But then the parallel for that is that it's of him wanting to sleep with her and that sort of thing, and it is always framed as something that she is guilty of enticing in him.
Yeah,
not by her own doing necessarily, just by the nature of being her, a girl,
just existing.
Yeah,
literally just existing.
Yes, it's real rough. And I'm sure there will be more of that, but it is a thing that runs throughout the course of the book that is a constant, uncomfortable reminder of sort of, and it's the most obvious, as we mentioned, like moral, like allegory of the story is the puritanical view and portrayal of sexuality and as this thing that is literally akin to being eaten and murdered by a monster.
Yeah, to being consumed.
And it changing you entirely in a way that you're not even you anymore, and that sort. You know, it's there's so much baggage there with this.
There's a whole lot to unpack
with that thinly veiled allegory.
And I wouldn't even want to try to unpack all of that in this one episode.
No, we have 4 more to discuss.
And this element of it, I think, is the most obvious in this book. Yeah. Is like the most obvious nod to that.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to bring up in the book, it's a little different in the movie for reasons that we've already discussed, but in the book, the instant that Bella and Edward become an item, Bella becomes so insufferable. Like, the first 250 pages or so, I was like, oh, I forgot Bella is actually not that bad.
I liked her.
And then, like, they get together and it was like, ka-chunk.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he was like all that she thought about. Now, I wanted to point that out, but I also want to point out that this does not erase the fact that, like, culturally, through pop culture, through memes, through shitheads, Bella takes so much shit when the worst character is clearly Edward. Edward's the fucking worst.
He's the worst, and the shit he takes isn't for him being the worst. The shit he takes culturally, or took at least culturally, was because people could read him as gay.
Yeah.
Like, that was like the meme about Edward, is like, he's gay.
Sparkles
gay. He's so handsome and blah blah blah. Like it was all like queer coded, like veiled, thinly veiled homophobia, but Bella's wasn't. It was clearly not even thinly veiled misogyny. It was just misogyny.
Yeah,
it's Edward is by far a way less interesting and way worse character.
Oh, he's a nightmare.
He wasn't. The criticism of his character wasn't anything to do actually, like, textually with his character.
Mm-mm.
I want to say none of it. There definitely obviously was, but like culturally widespread.
And we talked about this in the prequel. Most of this criticism that we're kind of keying into is from the heyday of Twilight.
And more widespread cultural criticism versus like critical contemporary, like feminist critics at the time being like, he's pretty rapey. Like, we're not talking about those people, obviously. Yeah,
right. We're talking about the memes.
Yeah.
And even since then, more people have started to do more critical analysis of this series. But the reactions to both were rough back in the day.
Definitely were not great.
Rough.
It was all rough. All right. Those are our odds and ends. It's time, for the first time in this summer series, to hear our final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
All right, kids, strap in. It's time to get potentially controversial. I want to talk about Bella and character assassination. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that for the first 250-ish pages of the book, I was pleasantly surprised by Bella. And I stand by that. She actually has some characterization to her. She clearly cares for both of her parents to the point of being self-sacrificing. She's lightly sarcastic. She makes jokes. She has a little bit of a temper. She's smart. She's good at school. She's ambitious enough to read interesting books, pick out interesting essay topics. And she's quiet, and she's something of a people pleaser to some extent. But she expresses her opinions fairly readily. Now, I do think it's true, like I said, that she becomes much more insufferable after latching on to Edward, but I don't think that she necessarily loses any of that other stuff. I think it just gets overshadowed by that very strong and kind of sudden obsession. And as I was reading the book, I was thinking to myself, why do I remember Bella as a completely blank slate, almost devoid of any character traits? And then I watched the movie. So I'm going to posit this theory. I think the reading of Bella as a very boring character without any personality traits largely comes from the movie. And we'll see how I feel about it moving forward with the book series. I mean, maybe Stephenie Meyer goes more of that route in the later ones, and I just don't remember. But from where I'm standing, the movie took what little Bella had and ground it down to nothing. Was her characterization in the book strong or unique? Not really, but it was something. And furthermore, I think that when we lost her perspective, we also lost some of the threads that held together the events leading up to her and Edward's relationship.
I agree. The movie improves many aspects of the story, and I think on pure numbers, I had more items in Better in the movie than I did in Better in the book. But neither the book or the movie are particularly compelling or particularly well made. Neither of them have introduced interesting themes yet, at least to me. Neither has really kicked off a bigger overarching plot, and both are really hamstrung by generic writing and problematic tropes. The movie improves a bit on some of the problematic stuff, and improves greatly on the pacing and some of the dialogue. Some of it. To me, the book's biggest strength over the movie is Bella's character, and the amount of time we get to spend getting to know her as our protagonist. The movie can't match that, and since I think the most important part of the series so far is a fun form of romantic escapism for young girls, the book is just like a much more effective vehicle for that.
I totally agree. Even though I think the movie did some things better, I think we have to give this one to the book.
Seconded. All right, that's going to do it. I almost voted for the movie on this one. Originally, my vote was for the movie, but the more I thought about it, I teetered and I decided to go with the book. But yeah, it was a close one for me. They both have many flaws, but but the book has a few more than the movie, in my opinion. The movie has a few more than the book, in my opinion. So that's it for this. It was just about to hit 3 hours. No matter what we do, no matter how much we trim
summer series,
we still do 3-hour summer series episodes. I don't know how. All right.
You guys love it. They're deep dives.
They're deep dives. People, they are our most downloaded episodes because, they're the most popular books that we do. So that's, we spend more time on them than normal. Hope you had a good time. Hope you enjoyed that. You can do us a giant favor if you're new here. Couple things. One, you can support us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. You support us for $2, $5, or $15 a month. You get different things at each level. The most compelling thing is at the $15 level, you get priority recommendations. If you're a $15 patron, you can recommend things to us, and we are more likely to do them quickly. We've done quite a few already. Our First Blood episode, our Mortal Engines episode, our Christmas with the Cranks episode, and more upcoming have all been recommendations from our $15 patrons. So yeah, check that out if you're interested in that. You can also do us a big favor. You can follow us on social media, just Facebook, Twitter, Goodreads, Instagram, any of that good stuff. Also, if you can't support us financially, we totally understand. That's fine. Just do us a giant favor. Go to iTunes or whatever it's called now, Apple Podcasts or whatever. Mm-hmm. Find our podcast there if that's where you're listening to us, or wherever you're listening to us. If you can leave us a rating and a review, even if you're not listening to us on Apple Podcasts, if you can do us the favor of going there and leaving a review and a rating, that helps a lot. We're up to 69. We were at 70. Now we're back down to 69. Somebody undid their review. I don't know what happened. Maybe they deleted their profile, but staying at 69. I'm okay with it. But yeah, that's very helpful. And I believe that's everything I have. Katie, we're not doing our next Twilight story next.
No. Typically with our summer series, we have some breaks in between books. The earlier Harry Potter books we were able to do all right in a row. But these are long books.
Yeah, like 500 pages and more. So.
And yeah, New Moon is like 600 and something, I think.
Yeah, so we need some time.
So we need some time to read. So up next, we are going to take a break from Twilight, and we are going to talk about If Beale Street Could Talk.
Yeah. I'm really interested to watch this. I've never seen any movies by this director, who I looked up last night and now can't remember the name of, but he did Moonlight, and If Beale Street Could Talk, and something else well known. But I'm really looking forward to it. I remember hearing about it and thinking it sounded very interesting. It's based on a book by
James Baldwin.
James Baldwin, yeah.
And I'm interested to read it. I read a couple of his short stories in school, but I've never read anything like full length by him, and it's not very long. It's like around 200 pages.
I don't know if I've ever read anything by him, but I've heard him speak on like YouTube videos and stuff. He's a very compelling speaker, so I gotta imagine a fantastic writer. So I'm very interested to see what the book's like and how it compares to the film, because I've heard the movie is very good. So that is our next one, If Beale Street Could Talk. You can come back and check out our prequel episode for that in 1 week's time. And in 2 weeks' time, we're talking about If Beale Street Could Talk. And in 4 weeks' time, we're talking about Twilight New Moon, or just New Moon, I guess.
Yeah.
Twilight Saga New Moon. So if you're just here for the summer series, you can come back then. But we highly encourage you. Come back. We talk about interesting stuff every episode, even if it's not Stephanie Meyer's weird obsession with cold men. That's going to do it for this episode. Until next week, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.